Call to order a work session of the Goodyear City Council, November 5, 2007. We have two items on our agenda. Both are for discussion only. No action can or will be taken. All council members are in attendance. And our attorney is busy right now, and he'll be here in several minutes, I'm sure. And so we'll start with Neil Barton. And Neil, you've got input and guidance regarding the draft Parks Master Plan. No, it isn't, Neil.
Neil's present, but if you don't mind, I'll step forward. Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'm Brian Barnes, Deputy Director of Public Works. I'm here to present a work session on our Parks Master Plan update. City staff and our consultants, Logan Simpson Design, began working on the Parks Master Plan in July 2006. During the course of this process, we analyzed the needs of existing parks and began making improvements to those parks. This past year, we have completed over $450,000 of improvements to neighborhood parks. We have met with the public and stakeholder groups in numerous meetings. We are here tonight to share with you the findings of from those meetings and the extensive public survey and benchmark survey from 7 other municipalities. But we want to remind you that this is still a work in progress. We continue to meet with planning and zoning staff to review the impact of this plan and its relation to the general plan and to the 2001 Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan. We have also taken steps to extend this plan process to include the newly annexed Sonoran Valley area. When this process is completed for the Sonoran Valley, we will bring the completed Parks Master Plan to the Planning and Zoning Commission and back to the City Council for final approval. At this point, we have received a draft master plan that is currently being reviewed, and this is a copy of that draft. For the sake of simplicity, rather than sending each one of you one of these drafts, we sent to you an executive summary for you to review prior to this evening. Also, I placed on the dais just prior to the meeting some of the charts that will be presented in our PowerPoint this evening, so that if you can't read them on the screen, you'll be able to see them and review them. At this point, I would like to introduce our consultant, Jackie Keller from Logan Simpson Design, who will review the master plan process with you. After the presentation, we are available to answer questions, and we seek your input, guidance, and direction in completing this process.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This evening we're going to take quite a few minutes here to brief you on what we've been doing for the last 14 months on this master plan process. We started with the public input and inventory and analysis, and this draft master plan is based on 2 main sources of information. We utilized a physical planning process looking at all the natural physical resources of the city, from habitats, the cultural resources, slopes analysis, soils, and the other part of it was really the public input that we went through, and I'll go into that a little bit more. But that is what has provided the basis for developing the standards for the city. We took those standards and we developed conceptual alternatives. We went to a stakeholder group and presented the conceptual alternatives, got their input on that, and developed a preliminary master plan that was presented to the public at large. And we are here today with the draft master plan that has incorporated many of the comments we received from the public. The public input was based on a 4-pronged source. The public meetings, we had 2 public meetings. We heard a lot of information from the public meetings, and we wanted to make sure that what we were hearing at the public meetings were really a basis for the community-wide. And so we administered a recreation needs assessment survey that was sent out to the community. We also administered a benchmark survey for comparisons to communities, and using the focus group and stakeholder group. These 4 venues for input created the City of Goodyear Park and Recreation Standards that we'll be talking to you about tonight, and we want you to be able to review those and give us some input and direction on those standards. But I want to give you a little bit more basis on the input we heard from the public. As you can see on your screens, the public identified values, issues, and needs. What they valued about the community and the recreational amenities that they have currently were that they were safe, well-monitored, and maintained. They enjoyed the community involvement and the quality of life, the gathering areas the parks provide for them. They want close proximity to home and convenient access, and we'll see that that is also an issue for them right now. They enjoy the fields, trails, sidewalks, and pathways. They value lighting in the parks, restrooms, drinking fountains, and the amenities that come along with user-friendliness. They know that parks create an image for the community, and they want to be proud of their community by what their parks look like. And they also realize that parks can be an economic tool for the community. The issues that they brought up for the existing parks were safety. In some parks, there were not enough lighting. Access at joint use facilities is a concern and a conflict at times with different user groups. There's a lack of pathways in parks and connectivity throughout the community. There is vandalism and graffiti. But they also say that the care and utilization of existing parks is good and needs to be maintained. They understand that new parks need to be integrated into redeveloped or developed areas in order to meet the need that they were voicing. They talked about the dog park, newly opened, that it was not large enough, and there were some other amenities that they would like added to that, and I believe, as Brian had mentioned before, some of that work has already been done. Public access to pool facilities was brought up several times. Park programming and the issues and conflicts that go along with not enough park facilities and too many user groups vying for the same space and the same amenities, and availability of soccer practice fields. They also shared with us their needs and desires, and you can see that many of them relate to the issues that they were voicing. More sports fields for tournament play, recreation facilities and activities that for kids so that they don't have to drive, that they can walk to their facilities, expansion of the paths and parkways, convenient access to the parks, city aquatic center, especially for youth team events, sand volleyball and tennis courts, larger community centers, area for non-organized sports is important to them also, so some passive space, lighting for all parks and fields, sufficient parking for activities, making sure that if we propose new facilities that we have sufficient parking for those, and then again, improvements at the dog park. That's what we heard from the public. So we wanted to make sure that what we were hearing from the public, as I said, was also what the whole community at large was thinking. So we administered the survey via the internet on September 25th to October 10th. We had over 800 responses, which was an excellent response. We had a response rate of 17% and a 95% confidence level at 3.1. So with that information, we started to see some trends and some commonality between what we heard at the public meetings and what we were seeing on the responses for the needs assessment survey. To give you an idea what the responses were from the needs assessment, we identified several questions and we asked them to rank them from first to least, or greatest to least. And preserve the national environment and open space was number one, as you can see by the percentages there. Provide activities for adolescents and teens. We heard that at the public meetings. Provide multi-use paths and trails for connectivity. Provide outdoor park space for special events and passive activities. And promote participation in organized sports. All of these are what we heard at the public meeting. We also asked them to rank the facilities on what is most desired, not necessarily what you have currently, but what is most desired. Indoor recreation facilities, number one. Playgrounds, picnic room and facilities was number two. Acquire open space, number three. Paid multi-use paths and multi-purpose sports complexes. And you will start to see that when we talk about the benchmark survey we administered for comparison to other communities, you're going to start seeing why some of these responses are so from your community. We wanted to know why they don't use Goodyear parks and facilities. Number one was location of facilities or programs are not close to home, meaning they have to drive to most of the places they go. Don't offer programs of interest. Don't know the locations of facilities. Use facilities, programs provided by other organizations. And then the lack of desired facilities or lack of quality programs by the city. And we're going to touch on why that might be. This is a very important question. We also asked them what programs do most of their family members participate in. Athletic leagues and activities, special events, swimming programs, cultural art programs, youth team programs, and special interest classes. Now, if you think of all those programs that their family members mostly participate in, and you look at what the responses were from the why they don't use Goodyear facilities, because they're not close to home, they're using facilities at other organizations. And so these are the types of programs they are using at other facilities and organizations. We also wanted to see how they would support funding for new facilities and be able to help us prioritize what those are. As you can see, they ranked them from first to the fifth choice: develop new walking and biking paths, number 1, purchase land to preserve open space, fix up, repair existing park facilities, develop a multi-generational recreation center, indoor exercise and fitness facilities, and purchase land to develop athletic fields and facilities. You see a range of open space, passive activities to the active athletic fields, and indoor facilities is what they would support. We went to a focus group of special interest groups and stakeholders adjacent to you and within the community and asked them, is this true? Do you believe what we're showing you as far as the public input from the meetings, the needs assessment survey? And this is what we heard from them. They said, yes, we believe you need more parks. We also believe that a community park should be a minimum of 80 to 100 acres in order to provide enough space for all the different types of activities the public is asking for today. They also said that the parks need to serve the public and be an economic tool. Every community today knows that parks can be an economic tool for the community. Develop sites differently based on needs, starting to identify different parks for different uses so that that need can be met throughout the community. Single-use fields versus multi-purpose fields is an example of focusing on single-use fields in one park and maybe multi-use activities in another park. They also believe that the benchmark average, which we're going to jump into here real quick, should be the minimum standard for moving forward and developing parks in this community. All sports fields should be lighted, provide enough parking again for tournaments. Partnerships and IGAs are important in order to maximize resources. However, it was also brought to our attention that IGAs can be difficult for different user groups to use based on the window of opportunity they can use those. The benchmark survey identified Chandler, Mesa, Peoria, Tucson, Glendale, and Scottsdale, Arizona, as well as Bend, Oregon. Bend, Oregon was chosen because they are known for the quality of their park and recreation system. The tables that you have in front of you that Brian handed out, it might be a little easier to read than the ones on your screen. Basically, the benchmark survey helps us identify where does the existing facilities of the city of Goodyear rank in comparison to these other cities. So on the first slide, you see the neighborhood parks and the types of parks. And if you look at community parks and look at the line across, you will see that the acreage per thousand population, and all of these benchmark survey tabulations are based on per thousand population to equalize it across the board so that no matter what size of your community, we can understand what that means per thousand population, more like a per capita. Community parks range from 6 acres per thousand population for Bend, Oregon, to 0.38 acres per thousand population for Glendale. So you can see there's quite a range. You can also see that Tucson is at 4 acres per thousand population, and for the majority of the other cities that were benchmarked, it ranges between 1.5 acres to 2 acres per thousand population. By looking at the bottom row, you can see that the total of park acreage for Bend, Oregon is 20.21 acres per thousand population on the high side, and you see that Scottsdale at 3.88 acres on the low side per thousand population is the range of this survey. In the benchmark average column to the left, you see a shaded area, a shaded column that identifies the acres per thousand population for those types of parks. So we see that the benchmark average, which is the average of all these communities excluding Goodyear, for for community parks is 2.2 acres per thousand population. The current service level for the city of Goodyear is 1.06 acres per thousand population. So you can see that the city is not even meeting the benchmark average of these communities. And so one of the reasons we're here tonight as we go through the rest of these numbers is to gain information from you and direction from you on where you believe the city of Goodyear should be in comparison to these other communities, and where you see yourself in 20 years or at build-out. Do you want to have the same quality of life as far as park and recreation systems as compared to Scottsdale, Tucson, Bend, Oregon? That's what we're here tonight to get some input on. Again, we looked at the types of facilities for fields. I want to give you an example on the fields. If you turn to your second page, I believe. It looks at Little League, softball, soccer, and multi-purpose fields. If you were again to look at the numbers for numbers of acres per thousand population for each one of the communities, you can see at the bottom line that Mesa, Peoria, Bend, and Scottsdale are pretty much running very similar in the amount of fields, whether it's Little League through soccer field or multi-purpose, at about 0.5. You can see that the benchmark average with the other cities that bring that down is 0.42. Again, the current service level for the city of Goodyear is 0.17. So this is starting to show us why we're hearing from the public that there's not enough fields, there's a shortness of fields, and they have to drive long distances or use other organizations' facilities for their needs. We also identified indoor facilities because we heard that from the public meetings. We also heard it again in the needs assessment that they would like indoor recreational facilities and aquatic centers. If you look at the bottom row again for the indoor facilities, you see that Tucson and Glendale are leading the comparison cities by 0.07. And you can see that the benchmark number is 0.05. Again, the city of Goodyear has no indoor facilities, and so there's 0 there. So now you can start to see why the community is seeing they need indoor facilities. The next sheet also shows you the comparison of each one of the types of recreational facilities we benchmarked for, and that gives you an idea of what we use to move forward with in identifying how many of these types of facilities does the city need in what year, because we base that on population. So you can look at the different types of recreational facilities through that sheet, and what we use all this benchmark information for is to identify what a tailored standard should be for the city of Goodyear. Now, to give you a little background on recreational standards, many years ago people planned park and recreation systems based on the National Recreation and Park Association standards. In 1980, those standards were 10 acres per thousand population for developed parks. In 1990, the NRPA, National Recreation and Park Association, came to realize that that standard is no longer good to apply across every community in the nation, that it needed to be tailored to each community. And what they were identifying in 1990 is that the communities need to go through a public participation process, very similar to what we have done for this plan, to develop a tailored standard for their park and recreation system. They identified at that time that the minimum requirement for developed parks in a community should range between 6.25 to 10.5 acres per thousand population. That was in 1990. They have not really updated their standards since then because it has really been based on each community, and each community determines what standard they want to provide. The largest tool that we use to help you identify what standard you think this community should develop toward is the benchmark survey, so that you can compare yourself to existing systems that you are familiar with. So if you look at the next sheet, the park acreage needs. It identifies how many acres per thousand population we would need for community parks and also neighborhood parks. But you can see by the acreage needs for 2007, we identify by using the number of acres using 4 acres per thousand population, which is basically the Tucson level of service, which is an average, a little higher than the benchmark average, as you can see, which is 2.2. That even today, we would need almost 2 more community parks than what you have today to meet the current needs of today. And that's in line with what we've heard from the public and the needs assessment. If you remember, they said they had to travel a long way, they didn't have enough fields, they didn't have any indoor facilities. So that's where those facilities would be if you had those 2 additional community parks today. So we also wanted to identify for this plan the 2020 needs. So if you flip to your next page, the 2020 needs helps us identify what we need to have in 2020. And you can see by the comparison of the park acreage that we would need 600 acres. Based on having community parks at 80 to 100 acres, we would need 6 to 8 community parks. So that's our basis for identifying locations and numbers of community parks. We also went ahead and identified for each type of recreation facility, your next sheet that you're looking at. As you can see, all the different outdoor facilities and your indoor facilities, that on the right-hand column, it shows you the number of new facilities required to meet the 2020 need, based on the same process that we went through of per thousand population. You can also see in the first 2 columns on the left side that says average benchmark and the Goodyear existing facility service of level. For identifying how many new facilities would be required, we use the higher number. So therefore, if the benchmark was a higher number, we used that number to get you to understand how many facilities you needed for 2020. However, if the City of Goodyear's current service level was higher than the benchmark, we use that number. So for instance, the off-leash dog parks is a higher benchmark standard than, or is a higher standard than the benchmark, and that is the standard we used for identifying how many we would need by 2020. If you look at the bottom on the indoor facilities, again, since the public and the needs assessment had identified this as a major need, you can see that by the pools and aquatics, we would need 5 pool and aquatic centers by 2020. We would also need 2 recreational centers for indoor types of activities by 2020. On your next sheet, we also identified the outdoor facilities and fields, since that was brought up several times about fields. You can see that by 2020, we would need 18 Little League fields, 7 softball fields, 28 soccer fields, and 10 multi-purpose fields based on the benchmark average. So that was the hard part, identifying where do we start, educating us on what the deficiencies were for the community. This educated us on knowing what the community was saying and why is that. This is why. There's not enough parks and there's not enough facilities. Once we were able to identify the number of facilities based on the benchmark average, we were able to take a quick look at where would they go. We did an evaluation of facilities, looking for areas of land that would be available at 80 to 100 acre parcels right now today. I'm not saying it will be available tomorrow. So we identified all the existing parks, and you can see by the service areas in yellow of where all the existing parks are and where all the areas are that have no parks and are deficient in their service level. So we were able to identify where all the proposed parks should go. You can see in the northeast corner it's overlapped greatly, even with proposed parks, and that's simply because that land is available to the city to utilize as parks today. We also looked at Little League fields to make sure that we distribute all the different types of fields and facilities evenly across the city so that there's equity no one is having to drive far to get to these facilities. Again, we have two parks with existing Little League baseball fields. We were recommending that there would be additional fields and 5 new parks that would go from north to south, and no one would have to drive very far for those. We also looked at softball fields. Again, the 2 existing parks with fields, knowing that there would be a new neighborhood park, 1 softball field being in it, and then proposing that there would be softball fields in 3 new community parks. We also looked at multi-purpose, looking at the existing where they are, looking at the new proposed where they could be to balance the softball fields on the east side. Looking at soccer fields. Currently there are no existing, but looking at where we would place those would be where you see the green circles. Recreational centers. We had mentioned that you would need 2 recreational centers by 2020, identifying 1 in the north, 1 in the south to make it equitable for driving to. We also wanted to balance the recreational centers out with gymnasiums. So we would identify 4 new parks with gymnasiums that would provide similar activities in an indoor environment. Many times recreation centers and gymnasiums are combined with aquatic centers, and the aquatic centers from the existing is Loma Linda, outdoor pool. We're recommending 3 aquatic centers at the new park facilities and 4 outdoor pools. So you can see that the coverage for pool facilities would greatly increase and address the pool needs of the community. With that, we were able to identify, as Brian had mentioned, the improvements to existing neighborhood parks. So we combined a list of a summary of all the different facilities we were recommending for each new park.
When you talk about an aquatic center, you're talking about an indoor component.
Yes. An aquatic center would be...
An outdoor pool.
Correct. All of the new community park locations, as you can see by the list of amenities under all of these, are meant to be very wide, have a wide spectrum of activities, and anywhere from indoor facilities to outdoor facilities. And then we also listed the neighborhood parks currently existing that we are not recommending any improvements for at this time. And questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Any comments or questions from the public? Okay, let's open it up. Why don't we start with Councilmember Susan? We'll go that way, and then we'll go this way. Okay, Dick, you're up.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the great wish list. Did you ask these folks where this money is going to come from?
Well, we didn't ask them specifically, but we know that that is a question every community is faced with. And we have done other master plans, obviously, and we have asked that question at other communities. And most of the community, most of the public is very supportive of means that are earmarked or identified that will be used exclusively for park and recreation facilities. For instance, they would not support a tax increase, but they would support a bond for park and recreation.
The point being is that they're expecting this to come from, evidently, the general fund. And frankly, that general fund is going to be strained in the immediate future, as I see it. What is lacking here, okay, is not the inclusion of the developers in the areas. And I think it's important because they're controlling the land that's available to provide these type of services that we're that is being requested on this wish list. And I think it's important that they are included.
I would tell you that that one of the important reasons for doing a plan like this and to get it integrated into the general plan is the first step in identifying what the community needs are to provide the quality of life that the people here want. And that is the first step in identifying what certain funding mechanisms should be. It's not going to come from one source. It's going to be a variety of sources. But for most communities, that means looking and reevaluating your impact fees for new development. There has to be this study done to identify what the cost will be to understand what the impact is to the community and how that should be funded.
But has this been brought out during the course of these meetings? But Brian, you wanted to say something. Maybe I'll come up with what I was thinking about.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Sousa, I just wanted to point out that the public meetings were intended to gather input, and it's not necessarily, we weren't necessarily looking for their way of funding these facilities, all of these parks. Our consultant has provided in the draft master plan funding mechanisms that the city should be utilizing to take advantage of these things. There's ongoing discussions within the city regarding the impact fees. We're continuing to meet with planning and zoning to discuss how we could address the needs of the land and the impact fees to help pay for some of this. But you are correct in the fact that impact fees and land donations aren't going to be able to address all of this. Some of this probably will end up coming from the general fund. Well, but there are other funding mechanisms that we're researching as well.
You know, it's all right to want all these things, but people have got to realize that we're a growth community here, okay? And these things will come with growth, as is evidenced by what we've been doing since I've been on the council. We've provided parks and playgrounds. Sure, they're overcrowded. There's no question about that, or they're hard to get to because of distances that are involved. But we certainly have another park in Australia Mountain that is on the drawing boards right now that is substantial, so sizable, and this is just another step in providing these amenities to the public. But they've got to realize that that these things are not going to happen overnight. They come with growth, and the type of growth that we're experiencing in this community. It's contained and it's well planned, and these are things that fall into that plan in the long run.
I think most of the public that we talk to, and especially the stakeholders, probably realize that, except when we talk to stakeholders that represent soccer organizations, they want to position the city to pursue soccer fields as a first priority. Little League would like to see us pursue Little League fields. Swimming organizations would like to see us pursue aquatic facilities. They all want to try and position themselves so that they focus primarily on their needs, where we are truly going to be looking at the total package.
But you also have to realize that what they're wishing for is going to cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. And my concern as a representative of this community is where these dollars are going to come from. And certainly they're not going to come specifically from the general fund, that's for sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Lord.
Well, just in kind of response, that's kind of when I kind of tagged you a little bit. We've had some discussions. I was at a couple park meetings just recently trying to propose that when we're planning these parks, that if we can plan ahead of time with the developers, so that the developers don't put some of these amenities in their development, but they pay a portion of it for the city park, which is going to benefit everybody. So we have had some discussions. We're trying to tantalize at least one developer to start this with us, which might encourage some of the other developers to do this, so that we wouldn't have repetition of the needs. They would have amenities for the people that are buying their homes that would be palatable enough, but then we would furnish the other part and with their contributions. So that's kind of one of the things, but that's a lot of pre-planning because that has to be done early on. And in the one development we tried to do it in, they'd already sold several homes. So contractually, they could be sued. So even though the developer sort of, I thought, was looking into that, was kind of positive, they'd like to do that, but that prevented them from doing it. So I guess our responsibility is to keep the door open, and your responsibility is to get talking with these developments before they get to that point. Am I right in my assessment of that?
That is correct, Councilmember. We are also looking at expanding our IGAs so that we have shared use agreements with school districts primarily, but also with HOAs so that we can share facilities to help reduce the costs and the needs. Wherever we can, we're going to look for ways to reduce our capital costs, but then we'll also look at ways to increase operational possibilities so that our residents have more recreational opportunities.
And I was just questioning the dog park's not large enough. It would seem to me what we need is more dog parks in different areas, not making one larger than it is. Is that a good estimate of what? I mean, that's a pretty large dog park in my view. I was there with my daughter's dog, and I thought it was sufficient. So.
Yes, Councilman Lord, just to give you a little background on dog parks, they've been a trend for the last 5 years. We've seen that dog parks need to be at least 2 acres to be self-sustaining with the turf. And so a 2 acre to 5 acre dog park is sufficient, but what we're also seeing is that they need to have a higher service level of maybe having one in every community park. And also, yeah.
So that actually could be part of a development, is that not so? That a developer is developing his recreational area to sell homes. Again, along with that, he could build a dog park, which would be an incentive for people to buy in that area, which would keep their community clean. So that's another one of those, let's try to connect those dots.
That's correct, and that is actually happening in other communities, both here in Arizona and in Utah. And the other thing I wanted to touch on was you started to talk about the standard. We have to do this planning process to understand what that standard of park and recreation facilities are. And I also want to make sure that everybody does understand that while you have done a good job of bringing on some park and recreation facilities with growth, the current deficiencies show that you're not keeping up with the growth.
Sure. And I don't think we deny that. The city has grown faster than we had anticipated. And the other question I had, we talked about trails and connectivity. We have a lot of trails that we keep seeing around the city, and people have said they don't go anywhere. And I know we had as a city a plan for all those trails to connect. Are we focusing on that? And that would be an easy recreational facility for people if we could finish those trails so that people could use those trails going from south to north of the city.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Lord, that's some of the discussions that we're having with planning and zoning, where we're seeing a lot of privately maintained trail systems within subdivisions, and we're going to work with planning and zoning to assure that all of those trail systems do end up connecting and that they feed into the regional trail systems such as Bullard Wash, Waterman Wash.
And if you had to say right now, if we had to find money for a park, now we're already doing the Estrella Park, what would the next area of the city be most important from all your studies and findings? Just take a stab.
I got an idea.
Actually, from the studies that we've done, and I don't know if we can go back to the PowerPoint, but if you remember the circles, it would be the northwest corner that is deficient in facilities right now, and we also heard that from the public.
Okay, all right. Let's see, I have one more question. And I also agree with Councilman Seuss. Pardon? Yeah, we'll just have to- Go ahead, interrupt me.
The map is back one slide? Oh, maybe not. It's back a few slides.
Yeah, it's back a few slides.
It was the northwest corner comment that we were trying to understand. Is that the northwest corner
Just
below
point it out.
I-10 or in? Or
That's the one that I would
the-
identify, yeah.
Yeah.
The one that I would identify, Councilmember Holland, would be the park south of I-10, north of the river, on the west side of the city.
Right. We were just trying to get the location. Okay, thanks.
And then, excuse me.
There you go.
Turn on the Elmo.
Maybe we'll have Elmo up. There we are. CP8 is that 7? I don't have my reading book on. CP7, which is the park located just north of the river, south of I-10 on the west side of the city.
In that circle.
Somewhere within that vicinity, yes.
The other question, I noticed on the statistics that you had 0 on the pool, but actually you had 1 pool.
Right.
So I just wanted that corrected. On one of those charts, it said we had, but we have 1. It may not be.
That may have been the aquatic center and then the outdoor pool.
Outdoor, we do have an outdoor pool.
Yes,
and
it's
it doesn't,
shown as the outdoor swimming pool.
certainly it isn't what people really want, but.
Right.
that-
We have a
but we- but
1 1/4 of the YMCA.
1 1/4, yeah, 1 1/4 part of the YMCA. So, okay, and then my last point is I absolutely agree with you. If the world was perfect, we'd take this chart and we'd build them, but the world's not perfect, and I understand your concern of where we're going to get the money. Doesn't mean we're not going to try. So just want the public to know we know the deficiency, and I think everybody's working toward it, and we're going to try to meet some of those needs, absolutely. My last word is, I want to right now recognize Cato for the dog park, because the people that say the dog park is not big enough, Cato went to the extreme this year of getting all those shade areas and seating area for all the dog lovers. And so it just shows you what we are trying to do. When people came forth and were screaming it wasn't adequate enough, I think within a couple of months we had it done, and it's a great dog park. So I'm done. It's over to you.
May I just follow on one of your points on bringing the developer in with,
Yeah.
that's a great idea. The only problem, do we have any issue there with impact fees, park impact fees, construction sales taxes?
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Council, you theoretically could do it if you put it in your impact fee study, and then if they put it in, you give them credits. So,
Right, which you do.
yeah, you just have to have the study.
It's
you
got to
have
be
to
within
adopt
that
the
parameter.
study. Right.
Yeah.
There's steps you have to go through, and this would be one of the steps. But
But we're just kind of getting the feel of how they felt about it. And so that's where we were at on that. Okay.
Councilmember Osborne.
Okay. Start down my list. First of all, when you speak of recreational centers, I'm assuming you're talking of a very large type of center, rather than what I might call a rec room that may be, say, 800, 1,000 square feet. How big is a recreational center in your thoughts in this survey?
Most of the recreational centers that we've inventoried in the last 2 years range from 50 to 80,000 square feet.
That's what I figured they were quite large. You know, one of the things that I was thinking that might help, especially when we saw the survey that was to the public that Paula had given us, quality of life survey, whatever you want to call it. It stated that we don't have enough meeting rooms, and so my thought was if we took some of these parks that were lining everywhere and we put in just an 800 or 1,000 square foot community room that could be used for a meeting or, you know, a mom's club or the scout troop, that might help. Well, multi-generational, but they're smaller, you know, they're used for that neighborhood type of resource, might help in the planning of some of these events. I mean, Litchfield Park has their scout hut that's been there forever and ever, but things like that. I just wanted to understand a little more what you were comparing. I figured it was pretty large.
Right, and to give you a little bit more background on that, we have looked and discussed that further in this plan, but if you remember the 2 recreational centers, one north and one south, that's really intended to be the 50 to 80,000 square foot that has meeting rooms and indoor track and pool or whatever. The gymnasiums that you saw filling in the gaps between those 2 recreation centers would be a gymnasium that would probably have a little more facilities to that, like a meeting room, an administrative office or whatever. Brian's going to talk about a special use park that we're beginning to define also that would go in this plan.
Okay.
We recognize the problem with fitting all of the amenities that we've identified that we need into these 80 and 100 acre parks. So what we've done is we've begun to have discussions through this master plan process of identifying what we're tentatively calling a special use park. And that's a park that could be identified that some facilities that would normally go into a community park could be pulled aside and put into a special use park. And a special use park might be approximately the same size as a neighborhood park, 5 to 10 acres. And it could have amenities, facilities that don't necessarily have to be tied to the community park. For example, the community park, you're not going to pull 1 or 2 softball fields away when you can have them in 4 to 6 field complex. However, you could pull a small gymnasium, meeting rooms, you could pull an outdoor aquatic facility, you could pull a skate park, you can pull some of those amenities that don't necessarily have to be tied together with the other amenities within a community park and put those in those smaller parks. And then those smaller parks can be scattered around the city to serve a smaller service radius.
Well, gymnasiums are not inexpensive, and yet a rec room in comparison could be, and so that's why I wanted to bring that up.
I think one of the things that we talked about during this process to give everybody a visualization of what kind of park that would be is really Loma Linda. That's a neighborhood park. It's a little bit larger. It has an outdoor pool and a meeting room or a community center, but that would be more of a visualization of what it would be.
I understand.
How many acres is Loma Linda, just for reference?
8 acres.
8, all told?
But it's not large enough. But it's not large enough.
Okay.
The only one.
Addressing the parking situations, did you have specific questions that you could have asked or ways that you could have really pinpointed as to specifics on a size of a park and how much parking is required for that size of park? Because I know that that is a huge issue and very understandably upsetting to parents when you have to deal with that. Was that part of any of your survey? Because, I mean, you barely touched on it, but you didn't go into it much.
It wasn't part of our survey, but there are standards about how much parking should go to one field. And so we use those standards to identify how much parking should be in a park by identifying the number of elements in it. So there is a ratio of parking to the different types of elements.
Okay.
And that's one thing, as we move forward in developing parks, that would be looked at.
On that, when we speak to developers, are we making them go by that standard? Or are we just taking the land and they're putting it in the park? Or I think we need to pinpoint that a little closer if we're not.
That's one of the items that we're having ongoing discussions with planning and zoning about. There is a standard of 10.3 acres in the general plan, and the developers are typically giving the city the 10.3 acres. Unfortunately, that 10.3 acres comes to the city in the form of mini parks, minor trail systems, neighborhood parks. Typically, it's most of those neighborhood parks are owned and maintained by the HOAs. So as a result, they're lacking 3 basic amenities that are needed for a publicly programmed park, and that is adequate parking, lighting, and restrooms.
Okay. Moving on. I would have to imagine that in the public surveys, 98% of the answers that you were receiving were from adults. Is that correct?
If I can think back to the actual breakout of ages, and I don't think I brought that with me tonight, it was about,
Supplemental.
oh, is it?
Yeah, it's down at the bottom. I don't know if you can find it in there.
Well, your best guess, what would you?
It was actually about a third. I was looking at that
There
earlier.
was a third that were,
From 12 to 20-something was
12 to 20? Okay.
years old,
Okay.
was about a third, and 20 to 45, and then 45 and over.
The reason I questioned that was I had made the comment to Mr. Barnes a few weeks ago or a month ago that, to me, an ideal situation is if we were to actually go to 7th graders, to 10th graders, and give them a list of 5 amenities and say, hey, put these in order of your top priority, just to give us an idea what kids really want to do and want to see out there amongst their parks. Because I'm glad that parents and adults are getting involved, but do they really know what some of these kids want to do? And that's, I thought that would be a great way to find out firsthand. Just go to the school. Simple little, I know I say simple. I'm sure it's not simple to Brian, but I say simple questionnaire,
If I could, the community-wide master planning process tries to identify that the best they can through the public meetings, the needs assessment, and benchmarking. The next step in this planning process for park development is to have a site master planning process. So once we identify a site and we know what the park is, to have more public meetings to identify from that community within that service area what those types of facilities are. So at every level of planning, you really have validation that gets you closer and closer to what should really be in that park. We're doing the best we can at this point to identify what facilities should generally go into these new community parks, but the next step is to have a site-specific master planning process.
Okay, so I'm getting a little deeper into it then, I understand. Last question, really, when you speak of soccer fields, you spoke of soccer fields and then you spoke of multi-purpose fields. I'm from a football Pop Warner family and I never see football mentioned. So is that multi-purpose fields, or because they soccer and football go at the same time, and so I know everybody says, oh, they share. They don't share well. So that's why I question that.
Unfortunately, we found that out during some of our stakeholder meetings. That's where I was talking about each group trying to position themselves. But typically, the soccer field is the largest one of the fields of the lacrosse, football, soccer, for those open fields. And then the multi-purpose field is a field that utilizes the outfield in order to overlay a football field or a soccer field on it.
Are soccer soccer fields are larger than football fields? I wasn't sure.
I'm sorry?
In size, is a soccer field larger than football, or vice versa? I don't.
Soccer fields is slightly larger,
Slightly larger.
wider, and a little bit longer as well.
So back to the question. I'm sorry. So maybe I didn't get it. So
the plan calls for soccer fields that can be utilized by several different types of organizations. The softball field and multi-purpose fields, the softball field is designed specifically for softball, but a multi-purpose field can have softball, youth baseball, soccer, football overlays.
okay. If we ever could get batting cages, that'd be great. That's the last thing I had to say. Okay.
Okay, Vice Mayor Antoniak.
Sounds like a good idea for the Youth Commission to maybe
Yeah.
take up the Parks and Open Space Plan. What are we programming in the general plan? We talked about 80 to 100 acre park. What did we program in the general plan back when we did that for community parks? I feel like it was smaller, 40 to 60 is what I remember. Okay. So the assumption is my assumption correct on the 25 to 50 and 50 to
25
100?
to 50 and 50 to 100. The 50 to 100, the general plan calls large urban park, sports complex.
Okay. And does it call for as many as you're calling for?
Fairly close to the same number.
Okay. So therefore, did our impact fee analysis get at this, or are we now? We started getting at that question just a moment ago, but are we going to fall short?
We provided, as utilizing data from this draft master plan, financial numbers to the impact fee study that will be able to address some of this growth.
Okay, so the forthcoming study, no? The forthcoming study, then it would be part
Yes,
of the forthcoming study?
part of the study being done by Tischler Bish.
Okay. I'm just hearing what we need to, funding's an issue, and if folks are willing to bond for it, but they're not willing to tax for it, they're still going to get taxed by the bonds. So I guess there's a bit of a public education process that goes on there in terms of if folks expect a level of Chandler or a level of Tucson or some other places, we need to educate them in what is a developer's responsibility when they come on board and what's our responsibility as a sustainable community and folks that, obviously there's some front-end infrastructure, but at the end of the day, if we talk about an 80 or 100 acre park and 6 or 7 or dozens of them, by the time we add in everything south of what you haven't looked at yet, significant O&M issues that we'll face if we don't have ongoing funding for those parks. So go ahead, you got a comment to that?
Well, I was going to address your O&M comment. that goes to part of the reason why we want to look at larger facilities, because we can maintain a larger facility at a economy of scale much more efficiently than we can maintain 3 30-acre parks that are spaced farther apart. They'll serve the same need, but they won't be as efficiently maintained, and our O&M will increase.
I don't know that I'm learning anything new of my own experience. I mean, I kind of experience a lot of the things that a lot of folks have given you feedback on. I mean, there's not, I can't, if I had a nickel for every time I've heard from the soccer community in the 5 years I've been sitting up here, for the amount of soccer fields that we've got to have out there, I'd say, yeah, I mean, the swimming is starting to become somewhat of the same, and we're starting to hear from some of the swimmers in the community saying, I can't get to a diving board that's 3 meters tall. I can't get to a proper facility to be able to utilize time, and places are overbooked. So, yeah, I wish we could build it tomorrow, but we've got significant dollars to come up with. What's that?
Oh. Could be ice skating rinks we're looking for.
Could be ice skating rinks we're looking for. Yeah, no. And I don't think you mentioned this in your deal, but did we talk about, there's funding and then there's budget. Do we even address budget dollars in terms of what type of budget it would take if it was current day dollars to build out this?
That will be part of the master plan, and we have started to take some initial looks at each one of these parks, what it would cost in 2007 dollars.
What's and I'm struggling with this 80 to 100 acre, we call it a community park, when we've got the North Community Park that was the 40 acre, now 27 acre park, and we're calling it a community park. To me, we don't have one of these yet. We simply don't have this kind of facility that exists in the city yet. What type of money are we talking about if we were to build an 80 to 100 acre park today?
That'd be huge.
Vice Mayor Antoniak, we would probably be talking about $50 million for construction costs and $40 million for land costs.
So you're talking $1 million an acre. By the time you're all infrastructure all in. Some serious money.
I think everyone needs to keep in mind that it's a little overwhelming, obviously, right now, and every community is dealing with the same kind of scenario of how do we fund this, and every community addresses it in a different manner. And what we're seeing in we talk about these large parks, and your question about, well, we don't even have one yet, that's really the evolution and the trends that have been set in the park and recreation industry in the last 20 years. 20 years ago, a community park was 40 acres in size, and it met the need of the community. 20 years ago, we didn't have all these special interest groups. We didn't have a lot of tournaments going on for soccer. We didn't have dog parks and skate parks. And so in 20 years of evolution for park and recreation in the country, those things have increased so much that's why our community parks are getting so much larger. So we want to anticipate that. Will you use 100 acres right now today? Well, today you might, because you're deficient by 2 parks. But the idea is that you're setting aside land not only for building this first phase of what you need, but what you might need in another 10 years. What interest is there going to be that you need to develop? The other thing that came across in our planning process, which was brought up for programming, is that many parents have children at different age groups and in different activities, and so they're driving all over the community to go to this park to drop John off, to go to drop Sue off, or whatever. And we want to make sure that these parks have the amenities in them so that they can go to one park and they can keep an eye on all their children at one park instead of what they're doing. So you heard that in the public comments about not convenient access, too far to drive. We heard it again in the needs assessment. So that's a real issue right now.
I'm pondering the question of whether or not we ever ask the public if they'd be willing to sacrifice a portion of their own backyard if it meant a larger community park. And I'm wondering if we ought to be pondering the question here on, as local leaders, on whether or not, we had this discussion, and Mayor, you'll remember back on the general plan, we talked about 2 to 4, but in order to get to 4, you got to put so much into the community for us to say, 3.75 houses to the acre is actually something that's a doable feature. If you come to me with a community that's got 5 to the acre but has a 100-acre park and has fantastic facilities and community facilities around it, and it's not necessarily taxing the CFD or I don't know. I guess I'm thinking that we ought to re-energize that conversation as we face these issues like parks and other things. The dollar is not going as far as it used to back in 1975, maybe when that wasn't me, but back in 1975 when the standards were probably built, 40 acres, 40-acre community park was a doable thing. A lot of people had 1-acre homes then, and they were going out there because they were practicing, they were playing a soccer game when 4 kids in the backyard used to practice soccer in the backyard. Today that doesn't happen so much. I mean, I can't send my 2.5-year-old out in the backyard without kicking a ball over the fence. So, but I'd give up 10 feet of my backyard if I knew I had more parking at a park, if I was guaranteed, a safe, reliable place for my family to enjoy. I think the folks that are coming in and buying houses now that are, as well as even folks that are retiring in this community may be willing to have that discussion. So maybe we ought to be asking that. Who knows? Maybe
We'll
not.
have to talk about that one.
But, I think there's some folks that would be willing. I mean, water's becoming more expensive. It's becoming popular to be green. It's becoming, popular to, re-energize and join your community and put the dang text pager down and everything else and get out there. I don't know. Just a food for thought.
I think you hit on a lot of good topics of what has changed the park and recreation industry in the last 20 years, of how our society changes and it affects those kind of facilities. The comment that was made earlier about, the sales tax versus bond, I think the general public feels that if it's a bond election and it's set that it's for parks and recreation, they will support that because it is going toward parks. And you've seen that in the valley here. You've seen Phoenix pass huge bond for open space. Pima County passed huge bond for open space. So people from our surveys and other projects have said they would support park and recreation bond because they feel that money will be like the 10 square feet in your backyard that you're giving up, that it will go to what they want.
That's it for me.
That's it, okay. Councilmember Cavalier.
Yes. First question I have, and by the way, thank you for the nice presentation. It was very informative. On the CIP, how much has been set aside, total money, and I should know this because I was on that committee that put that together years ago, but what amounts approximately were set aside in the CIP for parks? Do you remember that, Brian, or approximately? Just
Thank you, Neil. Neil's reminding me. We have $5 million set aside in next year's CIP, and after that, we don't have anything set aside.
okay, so that's the end of it after the 5. Okay.
That's correct.
Now, next thing, I've heard a lot of comments about what we need and how difficult it is to get this. Something I've been toying with and talking to people in the county system about and people in the city about. We've got a 4,000-acre county park down here, and it's being underutilized, it's poorly maintained, and it needs to be, something needs to be done. I think the city needs to seriously look at working with the county or talking about taking it over from the county, but there's a large area down there that could be set aside for a city park. It's just one of the areas, and it's close to the center of the city. But I think that's one place we really need to stop and take a seriously take a look at that area, because land has become too outrageously expensive for us to build any parks or to buy land for parks. And then our general plan, I hear comments about the general plan, and this is just another part of that general plan that's antiquated. 20 years ago, as you stated, the general plan was built on what we knew 20 years ago was needed in communities. Well, that's changed today, as you have just stated also. The fact that these communities, if you go out and read any of these articles or any of these books on economic development and sustaining residential neighborhoods, you'd better put your parks in, and those parks better be there or you're going to lose your neighborhoods. That's beginning to happen in Goodyear. And I don't want to see that continue on down. We've got to put a stop to that. And I'm wondering if we can't do something that kind of follows along with what Vice Mayor Antoniak was stating, putting more emphasis on the larger parks and less emphasis on the distance between houses and the distance for these open spaces, and have the developers give us larger areas for parks. Wouldn't be taking anything more away from them as developers, but it would it'd give us something that I think would make that community, each one of those communities, more sustainable. And walking a half mile or three-quarters of a mile to a park, I don't think is that difficult for a child or for anyone. And people will see to it that their children at least go that far. The small neighborhood parks are fine, but we don't have any amenities in those parks, and the HOAs are not taking care of them, so they've become a total waste. The one in the north, what used to be called the Arnold's Manor area, there's a 6 or 7 acre park there, and then that was already mentioned, the Loma Linda Park. It's a small park. These are useless parks. There's another one over here in Wildflower by the school. It's a small park. These are not doing anyone any good. We need to set something else aside for, or at least in the future, decide to do something different. And then bond money, as far as bond money goes, we have to just decide as a city how much money we're going to set aside for bonding. If that money can be used for parks, it doesn't change the tax structure. It doesn't change what people pay for taxes. It comes out of the secondary tax. It's just a matter of what our bonding capacity is and how far we can go and how much of that we are willing to spend on parks. And I think it's all that in a nutshell. And as far as any specifics that we talked about, I think everyone hit on the specifics we need for these parks, and your survey did part of that. I think it's very important that we meet those needs. And it's everyone has these specific things in mind that they want in their parks, but the problem is, as Councilman Souza mentioned it, that that money, where's that money coming from? And we've got to decide. Are we going to set that much aside in bonds? Is that important enough to keep our communities sustainable? And that's really important, because we can't let these communities go downhill. And the parks are the answers. Then finally, the only other thing I wanted to comment on is our school facilities, gymnasiums, all of the facilities that they have are being underutilized, especially in the summer. Those things sit empty most of the summer, and it's I know they're used somewhat, but we could use those facilities and their fields and everything else. They should be used more than they are being used, and we should be working out some kind of a co-op between the city and the schools for those. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, if I may, can I address a couple of comments from Councilmember Cavalier? I just wanted to let you know that we are continuing to have discussions with P&Z about the issue of getting land from the developers to be able to develop these parks. I have had some very preliminary discussions with Maricopa County Director of Parks regarding the regional park, and we will continue to look at that. And that brings into the issue of the school gyms. We're always looking for partnerships. We have got the basic IGAs with some of the elementary schools that will give us the opportunity to take advantage of some of those gymnasiums. We're continuing to refine those as those develop. And I was also passed a note that to remind Council that the CIP is updated each year, and in addition to the 5 years that we have for next year in EMR, we also have $5 million set aside for the city center 100-acre site. But that, because the CIP is addressed each and every year, we can allocate additional funding for parks. It just has to come from some other project.
Understood.
Thank you. Councilmember Holland?
Well, I thought it was a great survey. We got a lot of good information to work on. It was good, and I feel like it's saying to us, be forewarned. It's coming, and we have some time to do this, so we can do good planning. And Brian, of course, we're looking to you for all that good planning. One of the concerns that I had has to do with the upkeep, because when we're trying to think about all the money that's going to go into this, we can't forget that. I saw what happened when we went to the skate park, and it was just annoying. We had a really nice park, and the bathrooms were good and sparkling and all of that. And what did it take, 2 weeks? And I think that would be a real important thing. I don't think if we're going to put buildings out there, we just can't leave them unsecure. And so I want to make sure that becomes a part of our budget. I think also I had a little experience about driving all over town for some of our activities when my grandchildren visited, and that is a real experience. I know a lot of parents go through that all the time. When my children were growing up, I didn't have to do that. We did have small community parks, and we had a little skating ring and things like that, and it worked out well. So I can really sympathize with some of the parents. One of the comments too that was made was, let's have more big parks and maybe not so many small parks. But I look at those small parks like greenbelts. It's pleasing to the eye when you go through the neighborhoods and you see the small parks. And little kids especially can go out there in the afternoon. Their parents don't have to go so far, and they can just take a nice walk, and kids tumble on the grass. They don't need anything. They just love being out there. And so I guess I'm for the green belt small park areas that you see in the communities, and I think it helps the developer there to help sell some homes. I'm also want to echo what Councilman Cavalier said, and that's about the schools, because many times we see schools sitting empty, the schoolyards. The summer, it's understandable. My gosh, it's hot out there, and we do understand that. But there are other times, school is out and there's no one there. Everyone leaves. And I think that in the afternoons, that should become kind of more neighborhood-oriented. I know we have fences all around them, and some of that might become an issue, but I respect your ability to work through that.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Holland, first of all, yes, through the IGAs, we're trying to open those up not only for the city use, but other organizations as well, where the schools are maybe a little bit hesitant to open up their school sites to other organizations. The city has the insurance capacity to be able to carry those issues. We don't want to take away from the small parks that the developers provide to the HOAs. We're looking to develop a whole package of parks that will meet all of the needs for our residents. And as far as our O&M budgets, we've talked in the past about the possibility of a park ranger program to protect those parks, especially during off hours when park staff isn't around. And we'll continue to address that in the O&M budget in years to come.
Okay. Yeah, safety is a real big thing for me, so I brought it up before. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Holland, I just wanted to add that you had touched on a very important topic, and that was the open space areas and other levels of parks. And keep in mind, when I had talked about the National Recreation Association standards, is that when they talk about 10 acres per thousand population, they're talking about 10 acres of developed parkland. Here in the West, we're also seeing that the need, as you saw in Bend, Oregon, they had 22 acres per thousand population. That included developed parkland as well as open space. So it's becoming more of a common trend for communities to set aside 10 acres of developed parkland in addition to 10 acres of open space land for communities. So a total of 20 acres per thousand population.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, just a couple of questions and comments. I want to second Councilmember Cavalier on this County Park. That's a huge piece of land. I'm talking about the floodplain. I don't mean the mountain. That's a tremendous opportunity. But that land is in disrepair right now, and it has been since I've been in Goodyear. And the county recognizes that, and it's not their fault. It's just that there hasn't been any money to do anything with that. And yet, that is a perfect place for us to capitalize on and become a park that we could be proud of. And I think if we, as a city, would now decide what's the best way to approach this. Do we want the mountain? Or do we just want the floodplain area? And is it best to try to acquire it, negotiate for it, or to joint use it with the county, in which we assume a significant financial burden to bring it in line with what we'd expect? I would guess that the county people in that area, the supervisor in particular, would be open to discussion on this. So that to me is an opportunity. So I certainly agree with you on that one.
We heard that, didn't we, when you did that hike?
Yes. Yeah.
How long ago was that?
That's a couple years ago.
Yeah. She asked if we wanted to buy it. Are we ready to say?
Yeah. And then opportunity for collaboration with private interests. I don't mean developers. We've discussed that and certainly agree with that. But, for example, in my private business, I represented someone who wanted to build a huge facility with, and I don't even know what all was going to be in it, but ice skating rink, you mentioned that, indoor soccer, and other things. And this person was only one of several that were approaching the city at that time. So I have to be careful I wouldn't have a conflict of interest, so I can't discuss it in detail. But is this not an opportunity for us to go out on an RFI and ask, does anybody want to partner with the city of Goodyear in doing something like that, where we can help them maybe in the acquisition of land or something, and then they would run it as a private business. But these are huge undertakings. But this is what you're really looking for, is this kind of stuff. If we want to be special, we have to have, like Peoria has a special couple of facilities. We should be moving in that direction, and I think it isn't incumbent upon us to do it alone. It's incumbent upon us to seek private interest, I think, and work with them. And then I agree with everybody, but I want to emphasize Councilmember Souza. When he and I came on duty 8 years ago, there was 18,000 people in this town. In one park, Loma Linda. Now we're 3 times that. We don't need to beat ourselves up here. I think the staff and the councils that are no longer with us really understand this issue, that we need to do more and better. But, we still have things right now that we're planning and are funded in our CIP, I think. The Bullard Wash, I believe, is that park, or at least in part. Now, I didn't know about this West Goodyear area. That's great. We've got the city center. And Estrella. There's good stuff happening out there. We just have to hang in there with it, I think. But we're doing all right. We're not perfect, but we're moving in the right direction.
Mayor, just to confirm what you're saying, I went and toured last year the ice skating facility in Peoria.
Yeah.
And they were a company that wanted to come here. They actually talked about, could we do something like a public-private partnership? And in parts of sometime during the year, they take those ice rinks and they make them into practice soccer fields and practice field hockey fields. And they were actually interested in looking into that. So you're right, there are those facilities that are willing to come into your city. At least it would help with some of this interim time and placement of them.
Yes, sir.
Mayor, what you said about additional facilities, did you consider at all the baseball fields that are going to be coming along with the Cleveland Indians? Any good for? Is that considered in this plan at all? But there are several, ball fields that we're going to have the use of for 9 months of the year.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Sousa, they're not specifically designated as one of the community parks, but it is amenities that we will be taking advantage of.
We own that.
I absolutely understand that, and I'm saying it's not designated as a community park simply because it doesn't have the other amenities that go along with this with a community park definition. The soccer fields, softball fields, those types of amenities. But it is something that is allocated for in this master plan.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then now we're at the City Council receive a report from the Lipsco staff on their progress to address the ongoing odor complaints. They will also discuss their plans to modify and expand the existing Palm Valley Water Reclamation Facility. Sean Bradford.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. As the mayor was so kind to do the introductions, Lipsco is here to give you a briefing on their work to date on odor, as well as some proposed plan expansions, and then we also want to discuss an interconnect, a sewer interconnect between the city and Lipsco. At the end of Lipsco's presentation, staff has prepared just a few short slides to provide council with some talking points, and at that point, I think we can open it up for questions. Thank you. Matt Garlick with Lipsco.
Thank you very much, Sean. My name is Matthew Garlick. I'm the general manager of Litchfield Park Service Company. I think we were here last time, a couple months back, addressing the council at that time regarding outstanding odor issues. Tonight, we are happy to be here to update Mayor Kavanaugh, council members, on the progress made at the Litchfield Park Service Company Palm Valley Water Reclamation Facility, as well as to discuss some of the other, I guess what we call improvements. Tonight we're going to address the Lipsco odor abatement progress, the Palm Valley Water Reclamation, WRF improvements, proposed sludge handling changes, and the proposed interconnect, as Sean Bradford alluded to, with the city of Goodyear. Without further ado, great park presentation, by the way. Learned a lot from that. Tonight I've got Brian McBride from MES, McBride Engineering Services, who's going to be doing our presentation. We will be here to answer any questions you may have, myself and Bob Dodds, as well as Devin McGraw, another engineer from MES. So without further ado, Brian.
Could Eddie put on the other presentation? That's mine. I'll do that last. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, member of council, I'm Brian McBride with McBride Engineering Solutions, and I'm here to talk about the things that both were already mentioned here. Let me see if I can get this right. Okay. We're going to talk about the odor abatement progress, because I know that's a huge issue with the council as well as the community out around the Lipsco plant. So we'll start with that, and then we're going to talk about the improvements in general with the facility, and then the proposed interconnection. My firm was brought in January of this year. When we were brought in, there was a lot of work already being done having to do with the odor abatement measures. We were originally brought in to do a study of the plant because they understood that part of the problem with the facility was the fact that it wasn't working at an optimum level from a technical and equipment standpoint. So we were brought in to do an evaluation of the facility to see what improvements might be made. At that time, part of the report ended up being recommendations on the odor control itself. And at that time, they were looking at the measures that were being implemented at that time were a polishing unit on their existing wet scrubber, their chemical wet scrubber, and then plans for basically tripling the size of that scrubber to accommodate the odors that they actually have in the plant. Now, when we came in, we made some recommendations for an alternative measure on that I'll get into in a little bit. Also, we really suggested that they approach it from many angles to make sure that from all angles they're getting this, because there's a lot of reasons that the plant was having the odor issues, and so we suggested they attack it, which they did. They allowed us to do and brought us in to do an upgrade to the plant, mostly a performance upgrade that I'll talk about shortly, and but also to attack the odor from many angles. And that first slide talks about the odor abatement measures. The ones that are now implemented and these have been implemented since we came on board, and that's they took the influent. One of the problems with the plant was the influent wastewater that had a lot higher levels, so they took a look at that and took some measures for it. A temporary centrifuge installation. I'll get into these in more detail very briefly in the following slides. The granular activated carbon addition that I already mentioned, the full-scale ion exchange system pilot that I'll talk about, and then there's some more measures in progress. There's going to be some solids handling modifications to the solids handling building, some HVAC modifications, a removal of the sludge digestion process, the permanent centrifuge installation, and additional chemical scrubbing capacity if needed. And I'll explain that if needed shortly. So the first angle that we suggested they address was one of the easier ones to address. The plant had a lot more odorous constituents coming out of the influent wastewater than it was designed for, and that was one of the main problems. So we suggested that they take measures to handle that before it came into the plant, because a lot of the odors were coming from the headworks based on how smelly it was coming down the pipe. So they put in, at our suggestion, odor control chemicals that they started first putting in at the plant. As you can see, there's on that slide, there's the Casitas lift station and the Saraville lift station, the two main lift stations that feed the plant, and there's an influent manhole. Before we had come on board, they had already taken measures by aerating the Saraville lift station, which improved it significantly, and then we suggested the addition of the BioCope odor control. The BioCope, we had a lot of success with. There was the Black Mountain Sewer Company up in Carefree, which is also owned by Algonquin, the parent company of Lipsco, had a serious odor problem up there that was, much more acute in the system than it is in Litchfield Park. And so we had done some research and suggested the BioCope up there, and it really controlled the odors significantly until we were able to address the real problems with the system. There were some structural system problems that were causing that. But in the meantime, that was very successful. So we suggested it here, and it did have a significant effect apparently. But since then, they now are using it off and on only when they need it, because the other measures have controlled the odor so well at the plant that they haven't used it. It's a very expensive chemical, so they have it there if it's needed, but right at this moment they're not using it. Is that correct, Matthew?
That's correct.
Okay. Then the temporary centrifuge installation. The centrifuge is very important. The one they have there, the centrifuge is what basically takes the sludge from the process and dewaters it into a cake form that then can be disposed, or either land disposed or land applied. Theirs that they had at the plant wasn't working very well, so it was disrupting plant operations, to put it simply, and more than they realized, because those effects were really affecting the odors. I would say when we took over, that was the number one odor problem, was the fact that their digesters were upset because they weren't consistently dewatering their sludge. They weren't removing the solids. So we suggested that they immediately take measures, not even to wait for. It takes about 9 months to get a full centrifuge in place. I think we got a temporary one installed in a matter of weeks, and they immediately started doing that, and that's had one of the most positive effects on their operation in that time. So they put a skid-mounted temporary unit, and then the greater design has a permanent one that's even a little larger, coming in scheduled for early next year. The granular activated carbon scrubber, that was the first measure they took. Because the odors were greater than what they were designed for when the plant was designed, there was some breakthrough on their chemical scrubbers, just overwhelmed. So one of the first things to do to prevent that was put basically a catch safe on the end, that anything that gets through in the carbon scrubber is taken off the exhaust, and so it's really a polishing scrubber. So that prevented the discharge of any additional odors from the scrubbers when they're overwhelmed, which happened from time to time, and is sized to accommodate the flow from both the existing scrubbers. Then for the aeration blower capacity enhancement, there was another problem that was discovered after we came on, that the blowers, and this had to do with the process problem as well, the blowers were not running at their full capacity, because when they were put in, they were downsized using shivs, changing out the shivs to downsize them, because they were over aerating at the lower flows, And then when the flows came up, and nobody actually left any instructions for it to be increased in size. Once that was identified, they immediately took measures, and that also helped improve the process and the odors. Okay, a full-scale ion exchange system pilot. One of the things that we looked at, they were planning on doing a tripling the size of the wet scrubbers at the plant. And once we looked at that, we realized that was kind of a sledgehammer approach. Just get a bigger widget to do a bigger job. So we really looked into what the capacity was and where it was. And the reason they were undersized was because at the volumes that they had, it wasn't working well in series. So they were pulling from the underground tanks through the rooms into the scrubber. And you need 12 air changes in the room for the OSHA standards, especially in the headworks, or required in the headworks, but they also wanted to do it in the solids handling building. And at those levels, it was overwhelming the fans of the existing system. But they didn't have it. They had enough capacity in the wet scrubbers to handle the majority of the odorous gases that were coming off. So what we recommended was that they separate the two systems out, to take the odor control system that they had and dedicate it to the below grade tanks, because you don't need 12 air changes an hour. You just need enough to maintain a negative pressure, and then find another system for the above grade buildings. And what we recommended, there was a company that came in called Ions International that makes an ion exchange system that basically treats in the rooms before it goes out. And they offered, because they only have one other wastewater installation in the United States. They're mostly used for meat packing and rendering plants and dog food plants and things of that nature here in the United States. But they've done a lot of this over in Europe. And so because they needed to get into the market, they offered to do a pilot that, if it didn't work, the Lipsco and Algonquin wouldn't have to pay for it. So we researched the success rates of this in Europe and the one that is existing in the United States, and it seemed to be very successful. So we recommended they institute a full-scale pilot. So they would sign a contract that said, you guys can put it in, and we'll test it based on our test criteria, and if it works, then we'll pay you. And so right now, as of now, the system is fully installed, and we're in, or almost fully installed. But it is installed to the point that they are testing it. We're testing it right now. We should have the final results probably by the end of this month, I believe. So far, so good. It seems to be working very well. And the great advantage of this, there's several advantages of this. One is that because it treats it in the room, it really does a lot for operator comfort, because the air in the room is actually clean, and not, the ion system makes the odorous gases inert. And by treating it in the room, it means a lot for operator comfort. And then it saved well over $1 million over the other solution, getting the tripling the size of the chemical scrubbers. And the O&M costs are about 30% of what that would have been, and there's no significant chemical usage. There's no chemicals. So the chemical scrubbers would have meant a lot more caustic and a lot more chlorine delivered to the site. So we're very optimistic about that, and looks so far so good. And I think it's been a winning situation all around so far. Then the permanent centrifuge installation, as I said, the one that's in there is temporary. So they will be putting a permanent one in that has even more capacity to make sure that they can dewater as they need to. And then solids building HVAC modifications. One of the things that was happening in the solids building was they were using evaporative coolers to cool the room for operator comfort. Those evaporative coolers were pushing air out of the room because, again, it was sized with not a lot to spare. So once you put the evaporative coolers on, it created a positive pressure in the room, so any odors that were in there were pushed out. So to prevent that from happening in the future, even if there are odors in that room, which there shouldn't be, we're going to redesign that system so it doesn't push any air into the room. I say we have redesigned that system, where it's now in construction. Let's see, removal of the sludge digestion process. Part of the upgrade design that's being constructed right now calls for converting the existing digesters over to additional treatment capacity for the facility. That will give them a lot of flexibility. I'll briefly touch on that when we go over the plant upgrades. But what that really does is the number we identified, the digestion process is the number one potential odor-causing process in the plant. Under normal conditions, it doesn't have that. It doesn't smell, but the problem is you can never count on normal conditions. You're going to have upsets from time to time. When you do have upsets in a digester, they really stink. And so you can fight that, and you can put measures in to do something about it, and they work. And it would work if we left it in there. However, it's much easier to take the process out, especially when most other facilities are landfilling it. So the difference is they would not be producing. They'll have aerated sludge storage. So instead of producing a Class B biosolid that is land applied to fields, it'll just be it'll be dewatered to pass a paint filter test and then landfilled like the majority of wastewater plants in Arizona. See additional scrummer capacity if needed. So we were also asked to do the basis of design to prepare for if the ion exchange system doesn't work, to do Plan B and add that additional chemical scrubber capacity. We really don't think that's going to be necessary at this point, but if it is, it'll take us about 12 to 15 weeks to get that implemented if it doesn't work, if the ion exchange system doesn't work, which it does look like it would now. Okay, so that's all on the odor control issues specifically. So I want to just give a quick, I'll try to make it as quick as possible, review of what the improvements project at the plant involves. As I said, we were brought in January this year to take a look at, to do a small study for the plant to identify, because we do have a lot of expertise in sequential batch reactors, which this plant is, to identify some of the major problems, and we got a lot of operator input, a lot of manufacturer input, as well as our own research at the plant, and identified some of those issues, and then came up with suggested the project that is underway right now, being constructed. The drivers for it were really the operational issues at the plant, which include all the ones you see there. And in addition to the operational issues, there are capacity, flexibility. They really were running at a point where they couldn't take anything out to maintain it in the way that it really should be maintained. I don't mean the regular mains, but I mean if something really happened to it, you couldn't take another basin down to go in and fix what needed to be fixed. And it's still in that situation, but this is going to, the project that's underway now will give them that flexibility. And then future phase concerns. So the additional WRF capacity would not be online until 2009, no matter where they do it. There's a few choices on how they're going to bring that new capacity online, but they don't want to run right up against it capacity-wise, which they're afraid they're going to do. And then there's an anticipated seasonal surge every year, and especially this year coming up with the Super Bowl and on all the bowl games. So those are the drivers for the project. The goals of the project were first and foremost to mitigate the odor control issues. I mean, people are so angry out there that they just had to do something about that immediately. And then the high priority operational changes had to do with the influent screening, the surge tank contamination cleaning issues, which I don't want to get too much into. I can if somebody has a question about that, but there was definite operational challenges that needed to be addressed and to add flexibility and reliability. And then the solids dewatering that we already talked about. Then another goal was to increase the treatment capability and capacity, to give them that flexibility, and then achieve the project objective within 9 months. So we were brought on for this project. I think we signed a contract for the design. It's on a CM at risk basis to do all this work in April, I think. And the goal was to have it up and running by before the end of December. And right now we're on track to do that, so it's been a really challenging project. The scope was to, as we talked about, was to institute the parallel odor control mitigation measures, the odor mitigation measures, and I won't get into that again, was to give the SBR capacity expansion so they can convert the existing digesters, gain that 1 MGD of capacity, and then have potential centralized solid handling at the Saraville plant. We talked about that, but I know it's not set yet what's going to be done at Saraville, but that's a potential. And then provide equipment replacement upgrades really to improve the plant processes, and each one of those, as you see there. So I did jump ahead a little bit and talk about the proposed solid handling change, and I mentioned this because I know this was under the original agreement for the operation of this plant. It was listed that there would be Class B sludge digestion, and now we're proposing to not do that anymore, and we think that's a good thing for many reasons. Basically, I'm trying to think of a disadvantage of doing it. I mean, the only disadvantage of doing it is not, I mean, I don't know what the market is exactly for having land-applied solids, but there's a green factor with recycling of biosolids, but there's also two sides of that issue. So some people are a little worried about land-applied biosolids. So that is a downside, but the upside is the less odors, is less potential for plant upsets and all this other stuff that we've talked about. And as you see there, I put some stuff on utilizing the sludge storage and how that capacity. There's not a significant change in the amount of solids that would be going out of the plant to landfill, as would be land applied now. And then I also mentioned the future potential centralized solids handling at Saraville site. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it over to Devin McGrew, that's also with McBride Engineering, to just talk briefly about the interconnection.
Mayor and Council, I'm going to give you a very brief concept of what the interconnection is. What we have right now is a Saraville lift station, which is located in the southwest corner, just south of the RID Canal in McDowell and Saraville. There's a little lift station there. It's got a wall around it. And currently, flow from the West Lipscomb area flows through a force main to the Palm Valley Water Reclamation Facility. What we're looking at is the opportunity to send peak flows from the Bullard Avenue interceptor, which flows from the north down Bullard and turns and goes east to Palm Valley at McDowell. So it's in the northeast corner or northwest corner. The sewer comes down and then goes and heads east, and it's on the north side of McDowell. What we'd like to do is have a pump station that would tie raw wastewater from the Bullard Avenue interceptor and pump wastewater back towards Saraville, where we have an interconnection already between the city of Goodyear and Lipscomb. There's already an interconnection there. So we're just sending wastewater where it historically used to go before the Palm Valley Water Reclamation Facility. The interconnection, as it says up here, is going to divert 100 to 300,000 gallons a day, in that range, over a 5 to 8 hour period of time. And the advantage that we have, and this is a very unique situation, I haven't seen it too many locations, but Lipscomb's peak flows occur in the morning between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. That's the main flow period. Goodyear's peak flows occur in the evening. So it's one of the few opportunities that communities I've worked in where you could actually have flow sent from Lipscomb during their peak period, which would be the morning, over to Goodyear system and not upset your plant or your operations, because your peak flow actually occurs in the evening. And so the concept is it would be a submersible pump station. We're not sure right now which corner of Bullard and McDowell. It'll definitely be on the north side. We're not sure if it's going to be on the west side or the east corner, but it would have, if it's on the west side, we're working with Westcor to see if we can incorporate it so it's not noticeable. We're also working with Suncor on the east side, but it would be a submersible pump station. It would have, it would be secured. There'd be nothing visible except basically a wall, and it would have odor control facilities. It would also be controlled remotely, so when we are pumping to the city of Goodyear, there would be a flow meter that would help us to control the amount of flow. So it would never exceed whatever our agreed upon maximum flow would be. And And because we're going to have telemetry, we'd be able to coordinate with your operation. So if there was an issue with the plant, your 157th Avenue, we could coordinate and shut it down in a matter of 30 minutes to an hour. It should be totally shut off. Maybe even faster if we're lucky. But that's the basic concept. The idea of the pump station is to pump like 1,000 gallons a minute, which is that would be the maximum, and that's equivalent to 1.5 million gallons a day as a rate, but it would never exceed the maximum, which is 300,000 gallons in one total day period. That's what we're looking at. So we would be able to control it. We're also looking at having a variable frequency drive. I don't know how many of you know what those are, but what it does is allows us to change the rate of flow to meet the needs. So if it turned out that the operation could only handle 700 gallons a minute, we could actually adjust the pumps down, the speed down, and it would pump a lower flow rate. So it gives us the most flexibility as far as making the diversion. But again, this really wouldn't be possible if the peak flows were not opposite. Where Lipsco's be in the morning and then yours the afternoon. So that's the basic concept. Our immediate need will be to figure out very quickly which side of the road the interconnection would be, and then we'd have to install the pipes that would allow us to make the connections later. We'd basically just do the work in the intersection initially while we're actually doing the design, so we can get that over with and get it out of the way quickly. But then the actual pump station would follow within 4 to 6 months. That's it.
Thank you. Eddie, could you put up the other presentation? I'll go through a couple of quick slides here. A lot of technical information. I find it thrilling. A lot of you may not. What I've tried to do is I'm going to provide you just a little bit of background on how we got here, and then just go over some of the issues and talking points that staff has as it relates to the technical discussions that Lipsco provided council. Just as a background, obviously we've been contacted in the past regarding the fugitive odors in and around the Palm Valley facility. Just to give everyone a little bit of history, just about 2 years ago, late December, early January of January 06, there was an event at the Palm Valley facility, kind of knocked out some of their odor controls, and they've been working on getting things fixed to date. I do want to make a point that the odors, as it relates to complaints to the city, have essentially been eliminated. We do get an occasional call once in a while, but it's been very, very infrequent, which is encouraging news to see to date. I think just from a staff perspective, we want to have some due diligence and make sure that they finish everything that they've started. There's a tremendous amount of work and engineering effort that's gone on, and we just want to make sure that they follow through and that everything gets completed as discussed. We have been in constant contact. Bob has done a very good job with the Lipsco staff working with the city. That's also been encouraging as well. Just as a background, just to kind of orientate where the plant is, given its close proximity, that's a half-mile radius around the facility, and that's a 1-mile radius. You can see that the need for odor control is extremely important given all the residential and commercial development in and around the Palm Valley facility. You guys had seen this. I think I presented this last November in a presentation to council as well. Again, I think it's critical that we're committed, I think the city needs to be committed to work with Lipsco and discuss all options available to make sure that they're able to continue to maintain their service levels now and in the future. The city's growing. They have a large portion of the current population and a piece of the still underdeveloped area within the city, and it's important that they're able to succeed and service those areas. And we're going to work with them as best as we can to make sure that they get that done. I think the discussion of permanent odor abatement is an ongoing concern. We've been talking about this for a long time. When Lipsco presented to council last fall, it was third quarter of this year. They're now piloting some ion exchange systems. Hopefully there's some encouraging results there. Our only concern is that Originally, a traditional wet scrubber was discussed. Now that's been put on hold. And as you can see, if the ion exchange system does not work, they'll need to go with the more permanent upgrades with a wet chemical scrubber, and that will just cause further delays. So we just want to make sure that they stay true to their word, that they test these systems. If they don't work, that they immediately implement more traditional odor control measures. And then as we talk about plant upgrades, I think at this point, from a staff perspective, we're a little bit of a disadvantage. We've talked about it with Lipsco. We haven't gotten into a lot of the technical details, but I think we need to look at, from a staff perspective, the impact on the 208 and any provisions and or authorization or approval from the city. When the city signed off on their 150-foot odor setback, I think back in 2000, there were certain conditions, one of them being Class B sludge. Now that Class B sludge is not going to be met, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We just need to look at that implication and potential negative impact to the city. So I think that's just, when we get into this, I think we'll need to come back to council at some point in the future with a little bit more detail. But I think staff and the city needs to get their heads around exactly everything that's going to be going on in that facility. And I talked to Bob earlier today, and we're going to be able to make that happen. So I think that's a good thing. The one recommendation I would make is that some type of detailed engineering analysis be provided to the city. We want to look at everything that they're planning within the facility, look at a site plan, and just to ensure that if the city were to approve and sign off on those changes, that they won't have a negative impact to the citizens. We have a very, very tight 150-foot odor setback. We've got homes being built at 155 feet, and we want to make sure that the facility is running at its optimal conditions. When it was first put online, there was very, very few odor issues. Recently, we've seen that come back to kind of the original setting where it's been a very good system. I think we're just concerned that continues, and that if the ion exchange doesn't work, they go to a more traditional wet scrubber or some other implementation of infrastructure. We just don't drag this out longer and longer. It's just, we want to bring this to a close as quickly as we can. Just quickly on the interconnect, Lipsco and the city, we've been talking now for 6 or 8 months, and we both recognize that it's in our mutual best interest to have an interconnect. We have 2 water connections where in the summertime as necessary. In the past, we had received water from Lipsco, and we want to try to return that favor. The city does have some excess treatment capacity at the 157th currently, and it just makes, I think, a lot of good sense trying to be that good neighbor. Lipsco is paying for all of the engineering analysis. They'll be paying for the construction of the infrastructure. I think the one thing, and I haven't had a chance to get with the Director of Engineering to talk to Raul, timing is going to be critical on any infrastructure they do on McDowell, given the McDowell improvements, that improvement corridor. We need to make sure that they get in and get their pipes in where their pipes need to be and get out of the way so that we can put in a brand new road and not have to dig it back up. So timing is going to be very critical there, and we do recognize that. As mentioned, when it comes to the interconnect, I think the issue for us is ensuring that the flow rates can be accepted by the city. Peak flow is a concern. We have a 3 MGD facility going to 4 MGD. As part of the upgrades from 4 to 6, we will have equalization, which will allow us to take higher peaks. But at this point, we don't have that. So we just want to make sure that we take flow from Lipsco at a rate that we can handle and over a time period that works for us. We can't put our system and our infrastructure in jeopardy to afford Lipsco some additional treatment capacity. I think we can work around that. I don't think that that's a showstopper, but it's just, again, it's due diligence, it's hydraulic analysis, it's just running us through models to make sure that when the flow does discharge into Saraville, that we can handle it accordingly. And then on the interconnect, I did put up a little quick map there, just so you can see what we're talking about. But essentially, the city has some large transmission lines that run north-south, and those are those 2 lines, one along Saraville, and then one that runs up the Bullard Wash. What we're talking about is Lipsco has been in discussions with the city. That dotted line along McDowell, they would take their Bullard interceptor. I didn't draw it on the map, but it runs from the north to the south to McDowell Road. They would construct a force main that would run up McDowell, or some type of McDowell alignment, I'm not really sure, and then discharge into their gravity sewer. And then at that point, we would do some improvements there's actually an existing interconnection at Saraville. It's just a small overflow structure. We would actually upgrade that and make that a traditional, as mentioned, lift station where they'd be discharging into our collection system along Saraville. But that's just kind of a visualization so you can see where they're at. But we're on top of it, and we'll continue to stay there. That's the end of my presentation, so I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Let's start over here on the right. Sorry, we'll go this way.
Put that map back up for me, Sean.
And then we'll go that way.
Tell me, the last discussion point that Davin, do you want to, I don't know if you wanted to be questions from the public, but our most active vocal voice over there is going like this and distracting me the entire time.
Yeah, I forgot to do that. Yeah, I appreciate that, Gary.
Wanna
You're
ask
always
Gary?
helpful. Opportunity for anyone from the public to speak.
Distracting the heck out of me.
Yeah,
over
I
there,
missed
so-
that one. My fault, Gary.
But leave the map up there because I'm going to come back to that, Sean.
Anyone else, by the way, is... Okay.
Mr. Mayor, Gary Yulzer. I would like to address this to Lipsco. Our water director, Sean Bradford, mentioned that we were going from a 3 million gallon capacity to a 4 million gallon capacity, and we have a capital improvement program. It's going to take us from 4 million to 6 million. My question in Lipsco is, how many million gallon capacity is the Palm Valley plant? And on the general plan, and when this plant was approved in 2000, there were 2 additional facilities that were identified that could possibly be built. And so my first question is, what is the capacity of the current plant, and when does that capacity run out? And then what is your plans for a second plant? And my third question on that is, what is the design? I assume you've learned something from this catastrophe in designing a plant in dealing with sewage, and so, where are you taking the design work on the Sarville plant that was probably going to be the next plant? And if I could have those answered, I'm sure some of your questions will be answered.
Gary, once you hang around, so make sure I get all your comments in. Matthew Garlick, once again, Mayor and council members. I think the first question was the current capacity of the plant. It's a sequential batch reactor plant. It's a 4.2 MGD plant. That was what was initially designed. Where we're currently at was about our average flow right now is 3.5. With the upgrades proposed with the McBride, MES is doing it may afford us, we believe, somewhere in the area of 750 to 1 MGD additional, which buys us more time in the future. In regards to the Cerebral lift station location, the Cerebral plant that the council approved, I guess there was some the magnitude weight approval back in 2000. The answer is yes. We've learned a lot from this plant. We've learned a lot about planning and how we do things a little bit differently for maintenance and what have you. And those will be taken into concern, as well as the city and staff. You'll all be very much part of that process as you were in 2000 when we built the first plant. Did I get all that?
So, and when do you think the Sarville plant will at least start being in the planning stage?
For like design?
For design.
Well, we're in design now. We're required to be in design now, and that's where we're at right now. So it's just starting to crank up now. My guess is that's 9-month process. Is that about right?
We should be online right now. They're current planning in the fall of 2009.
Yeah. So.
But we're also looking at other options.
Yeah.
We are looking at options with Goodyear and Bradford.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we're trying to land on quickly. We've got several options. One is the city of Goodyear on some future expansion, the Cerebral location. The nice thing that will afford us at the Cerebral location is the full 350-foot setback, unlike that we don't currently have at the Palm Valley plant. During that process, if you remember, for those that were around who had interest in it, it was a grandfather. About the time the permit was being approved, the 150 to 350 was being changed, and because it was basically ready to be signed in January, February, it was allowed by the state to go to the 150. The new rules are 350, so that will be full odor controlled with the full 350-foot setback.
Okay, thank you.
While you're up there, Matthew, identify the site y'all are looking at for the Cerebral location.
Yeah, where that's located?
Yeah.
That's actually, let me see. It's actually Cerebral McDowell, southwest corner. If you ever drive out there, you'll see a lift station way out there. It's a 100 by 100 lift station. It gets graffiti every once in a while. I have to go paint that thing. It's actually behind it. It would be sitting kind of in a triangular.
As the RID makes the turn to the southwest.
Yeah, right. So our border would be RID to the north. We're a great neighbor. It's called ADOT to the south.
Good.
And there might be some commercials, my understanding, potentially from Suncor to the east of that.
Okay, so is that, okay, thank you, Matthew.
No problem.
Question for Sean, the above ground, what above ground infrastructure are we talking about needing in relation to this?
Minimal. It would be a submersible pump station or lift station from Lipsco. I just put the big green dot there just so you could kind of see where it is. I had to make it big enough so you could see it. It won't be quite that large.
Yeah, I would hope not.
That's not the scale. I'm not an engineer.
Honestly,
I
with
just
all due
color
respect to
well.
the professionals at Lipsco, I'm not too keen on anything being above ground for them right now, so, but, you know, what, does the MAG 208 permit automatically address their rights to build the second plant?
Their MAG 208, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, it called for 2 4.2 modules at the Palm Valley facility.
4.2?
2 modules. So it's essentially, that's half of a facility.
Right.
What's built at Palm Valley now, you would build a twin, and you could double the capacity.
Is that a guarantee,
Well, that's-
right? Or
that's-
you have to come back to
that's-
us?
Well, that's in their MAG 208. There'd be public hearings and
All right. That'd be a headache.
political, yes. And then in Saraville, they have, per their 208, another, I think it's 8.4 or 8.2 million gallons of capacity that they could build in Saraville. Again, land acquisition and setbacks and things they'd have to work around, but from a MAG 208 standpoint, they're allowed to do that.
So, okay, so I was going to say, I'm going to ask some questions, help me understand it, maybe a dual answer, but I'm doing the math. It's 16 plus
Correct.
MGD that you require, and right now you really have the capacity for 4.2. So you're only a 25% build out on your total
And
system.
that's one of the things that's on the staff side we're looking into is their MAG 208 called for 2 4.1 or 4.2 modules, not one 5.2 plant. So they may, and I'm assuming that the answer is going to be yes. There's going to need to be some type of authorization or sign off from the city allowing a modification, or at least not objecting to a modification. Again, David Iwanski's been feverishly researching that for us and looking into those things. One thing that Bob did mention, the city's 157th Avenue water reclamation facility is the land mass is adequate to construct 22 million gallons of wastewater treatment capacity, and we're in the process working with engineering on acquiring a 1,000-foot odor setback. We'll have full odor control and only need 350, but we think that we're going to be able to have some efficiencies with not scrubbing all of the plant processes, just the ones that are odor intensive. And in order to do that, we'll need some additional either odor easements or land, and we're working with engineering on that. But that's going to afford us, from a city standpoint, the Black and Beach Master Plan, which we'll be bringing to you hopefully within about a month to 6 weeks, is calling for somewhere between 14 to 16 million gallons of needed capacity in the central planning area. So we have additional land or additional capacity that could be built and could fit within our land site plan, I guess, that we could provide to Lipsco. And one of the things that we've talked about is the potential of them constructing capacity within the city's infrastructure. It would be city. We would manage it. We would operate it, but it would be theirs, and we would be able to build transmission lines to convey their wastewater into our collection system and treat their sewage. And that again, that I think eases their issues with getting a plant permitted on Saraville or additional plant capacity at the Palm Valley facility. We're in an industrial zoned area, traditional wastewater treatment plant. We have
Well,
good
that's
neighbors.
temporary, right?
In and around the 157th is zoned, I think, in my opinion, it's...
No, I mean, using their capacity, I'm sorry, I didn't really...
No, I'm going down the same path. I mean,
Yeah.
we have 22 million gallons per day.
We could
can
build
construct. What's required of us at build out?
14 to 16.
So we have
6
to spare. That still doesn't get at solving the complete issue.
Correct.
Of capacity for those.
Correct.
Okay.
But that, I think, pushes things out and allows...
Some time.
Exactly, and to look for other sites in other areas and other opportunities, correct.
Where are you going to get a site in this built? I mean, the more and more time goes on, the more and more 350 feet becomes 500 feet and 1,000 feet in the permitting process, and pretty soon you got nowhere to go. Talk about the Class B sludge. we used to have Class A, or we do have Class A effluent coming out of your system, right? Because you water because you water the golf courses around there. I mean, you got one of your customers in the right.
We're talking two different things.
No, effluent though is Class A.
A plus.
A plus.
That's right.
You've got some customers in the back of the room this evening who water their golf course with it. But the sludge used to be Class A.
That's absolutely correct.
You came and notified us, dropped it to Class B.
Right.
What are the advantages? What are the advantages and disadvantages that you see doing that? Because I thought there used to be a market for Class A plus.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons we came to back. Oh gosh, I think it was 3-4 years ago. Yeah, I think it was longer than that. We were in Class A. The problem with Class A sludge initially was when we produced Class A, the thought was there would be a market for it. But as part of producing Class A, it also produces very odorous compounds that you get off of it, or captains and things like that. Plus, at the time, it was very expensive to produce that. And we did a study with, I think it was Black and Beach. I'm not sure which end, Black and Beach or Brown and Cull, I forget which one we represented at the time. There was only 2 places in the valley that were able to actually sell that, Surprise and another location. And at best, nobody else was taking it, so it was a very cost-effective measure at that time. I think 157th Avenue at the same time was doing B. So the council said, well, if you guys are doing A and it's going to reduce on polymers and costs, and we're doing B at the same time, then we would all go to B, and that's what we did.
So the short answer is, the worse off the class of the sludge, the better off the odor problem.
Yeah, well, the idea was it just took a lot more to process. We'd have to hold it, and it heats up. When it heats up, it generates odors. When it generates odors, it could get really bad. And we saw that early on, and we decided that's something we probably need to work with. The unclassified, going from B to unclassified, basically, I think Brian represented what happens there is when that process comes, we aerate it. We then would de-thicken it, remove the water. It'll pass the paint filter test, which means it's not, it doesn't slop out. It goes into bin, it gets hauled off, and it goes to land application, to a landfill. It will no longer go to like a farm or something like that. Unfortunately, we like the green aspect of the farm, although there is some risk associated with that, plus there's also additional costs going to farm. It's not like we get paid to do it. We have to actually pay to haul it off, and then there's some arrangement the farmer makes for that too. So there's costs wherever you go.
Sean, back up one. I know there was one other question I had on your presentation. Back up a slide. No. Go. Sorry. Keep forward. One more.
One more?
No, that's it. I can't think of what it was related to your slide, but I'll tell you my sentiment right now is I feel like there's a lot of positive action and a lot of great forward momentum, but I also heard this evening concern that Sean had, and I'll put it in my own words, is until the methodology is proven and that we're not getting any complaints from our neighbors and our constituents around the plant, that he's not going to be 100% satisfied. Therefore, I have no reason to be 100% satisfied. So, I'm all for partnering up and economies of scale, and if that's what it takes in the future to do that, then so be it. Let's have that discussion. I'm not for turning over ownership, operation, or anything of our plant. I mean, the minute it hits ours, at least I think right now our track record, all due respect, a little bit better. So I'm not looking, at least I wouldn't be in favor of a DBO or design, build, operate type of an operation unless Goodyear was the operator and the owner. So that's my sentiment. I also will look at very, very, very carefully at the next 12 million gallons you all have to build in your area until your solutions have proven themselves. We've got the ion exchange versus the wet scrubber, or not ion exchange, the ion exchange versus the wet scrubber issue. And I think the veterans on the council will say that when we approved this plant, we were told we weren't going to smell anything.
You're absolutely
so,
correct.
I'm cautiously, I don't know if cautiously optimistic is the right word or hesitantly skeptic is the right word, but I've got some skepticism still and still would like to see things prove out.
Okay, Councilmember Cavalier.
Only to say, this thing at Lipsco has been something it just amazes me, because when that plant was built, we were taken through that plant and told that for years and years to come, this thing would be this was the state-of-the-art plant, this would be the plant that everyone would use as their design, and the complaints and the smell and the history of this, the recent history of this, has just not been good, and we just cannot continue to expose our citizens to this kind of situations. And then to hear you say that you're you're about a fourth of the way getting to where you need to go, and we don't know how far out it is until you reach that full capacity that you need. That's kind of scary. That really bothers me. And you're going to be dependent on the city of Goodyear to help, which is fine. I mean, we can work out something that is beneficial to both the city and your Lipsco too. But I want to make certain that this is right. That this is right for everything else. And all this stuff about digestive flow and Class B, whatever, and it's all fine and well. But I just want the thing to be right, and I want it to be built right. And as far as the technical part of it, I'm not going to be involved in. That's why you're around, and that's why we have you. But I'm very concerned, and I hope that, and I'm sure you will. You'll stay on top of this, and you'll be our person to go to, because I'm concerned. I have very little faith in this after what I've heard and what I've seen and what I've been told, and what I've been led to believe, and what we've seen from it is there's just several different things. So that's all I'm going to say.
Councilmember Holland?
Well, Mr. Dodge, y'all just continue to get beat up, don't you? I guess I wanted to say that I think it's positive with what I heard tonight. Just being aware of what all the issues are and trying to put something into place to make sure that they're mitigated. I just think it's great. I am concerned about the HVAC system. You said you're going to try to make sure that that's going to operate in the underground chambers. And have you got that hooked up now? Is that already started working, or where are you with that?
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Holland, I probably wasn't clear enough about that because I skipped through that pretty quickly. Their existing wet scrubber system is designed to take the worst of the air that's in there. However, it's only as good as the blowers that are in it to draw that air out. So by dedicating it just to the below grade ones, you have a less volume of air, so it's easier on that scrubber, and it can more easily treat that particular volume of air. And so the idea is to take what you have and use it much more efficiently. By taking the buildings above where the operators work off of that, the volume of air that system has to treat goes down dramatically. And then because it's also a different type of air that's in the buildings, a different type of system tends to work a little better. And so there's some efficiency built in there. And right now, they have put that system on the below grade tanks, and it's working well, and we expect it to have no problem in treating. Now remember, it was treating the whole plant before, and now we've taken it off of that, and now it's just concentrating on what's below, which is really what those systems are designed to do.
Right,
is
rather
to take
than
that.
just aid the operators.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
If I can add to that, one of the other things that it does, and maybe wasn't represented in the presentation, is you've got to remember that we have people coming and going in those plants all the time, opening doors, shutting doors, opening bins, taking bins out, and a lot of times the community was smelling not so much the interaction of the plant that was being scrubbed, but they were also smelling the day-to-day operations. And what Brian was alluding to with MES there was the fact that these are now separated. So the high concentration orders you're scrubbing and you're polishing to get those out, and then the day-to-day operations with the Einstein, and it's working right now at 1/4 actually 1/3 its capacity, and it's doing some tremendous things. So when you open the doors and shut the doors, you no longer smell those odors. So when you roll the bins up and that air goes out as the operators are coming and going and doing their processing, you're not getting some of those fugitive emissions that we used to get off gassing out of all those buildings. So it is working quite
Well,
well.
we haven't heard the complaints from the general public, and that's a really good thing. My next question had to do with the interconnectivity, and Sean, when we first talked about this, it was my understanding that it was only going to be used in emergency. We were hooking it up, but only when their plant either became close to being overloaded or whatever. And that was, and at the time, we didn't talk about flow meters or making sure that, everything was being monitored. So, but somehow it seemed like we've gone to the next step. Is this going to be a daily thing?
We'd always talked about a small amount of flow on a more constant basis over a period of time while they're building their salvo plant or expanding Palm Valley or whatever they were doing.
I called it emergencies, but
And then there would be a peak.
When they
There
were
would be
stressed.
there would be the when the system was under stress. We had talked about a higher flow rate, potentially up to 500,000 gallons a day, in the event that they had plant upset or something happened to really increase their flows through their facility. So it will be designed for that 1 to 300,000 gallon per day. But I would think that the system in a pinch could be bumped up on a peak day and perhaps take 500,000 gallons into the city.
okay. So that you guys have worked out any issue there? Or you're still working?
We're still working with, Lipsco's still designing things, working with our engineers and our modelers on the hydraulic models to make sure that timing, again, for us, the critical thing is timing. When we get to 4 million gallons of plant capacity here in the near future, we will have over 1 million gallons of excess capacity available. So we could take 500,000 gallons, but we couldn't take it over a 5-hour period of time. We'd have to take it over a much longer period of time. So that's the tricky part, but we're working through that. And
Well, the concern that I have is you get used to having another system pick up and take over and take care of the overflow problems, or if you have more than what your plant can hold. You get used to it, and so you keep taking in more and more and more. And I'm wondering if you'll be able to shut it down when you need to, or slow it down when you need to, because you get used to that additional capacity. And that would be a concern that we would have, because we don't want you to be overloaded.
no, the city would have in its agreement with Lipsco provisions that when we get to a certain percentage, we would notify Lipsco that they need to make arrangements to either have their new treatment plant online or expansions within the Palm Valley facility, because our capacity has been committed to the development community and development in the city.
So it won't be something that's going to happen overnight. It could be, you could see it coming. You
Correct.
can see it coming, and you'll be able to
Correct.
start.
And we will have
working out the
conservative triggers within the agreement to hedge our bet, to even give the city a little bit wider of a berth to be able to make that call in the event that we get a large user, a large commercial, or from an economic development standpoint, we get a large customer that we really want into the city, but they need wastewater capacity. We want to be able to notify Lipsco that it's time for them to move their flows back to their facility or to their new plant and allow us that opportunity to service that large customer.
Okay, so that we're not inhibited when we get ready to look
Correct.
at more economic development.
And it is important to note that there'll be an O&M component, dollar per gallon that they'd be charged. So it is a bit of a revenue generator for the Sewer Enterprise Fund, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Souza?
Yes. You were elated about the arrangement that we have with Lipsco right now regarding the water, using water from Lipsco. We're paying for that water. What are we going to get for this arrangement from Lipsco?
We will charge them to treat their sewer. Dollar per gallon, whatever that dollar works out, $2 1,000. We're working on the numbers right now. So they'll be charged just like we're charged. There'll be a metered connection, and we'll send them a bill every month for a sewer charge, and they'll pay it.
You sure of that?
Well, we'll shut them off if they don't, I suppose.
That's the last thing people north of I-10 want to hear.
Well, but I mean, they will legally enter into an agreement to pay the bill, obviously.
Okay. How many other cities besides the city of Goodyear are feeding into the wastewater treatment plant that is operated in Palm Valley?
Mayor, Councilmember Sosa. Souza. Your question was how many other cities are feeding into Litchfield Park Service Company? We've got a small portion of Avondale, which is in the commercial area by the community college, up in that area in there. We've got all of City of Litchfield Park, We've got some unincorporated Maricopa areas, Maricopa County. I think that's it.
How about Litchfield Park?
Of course, Goodyear.
A lot of county, really.
Yeah, there's some.
Dreaming Summit, there's part of
Dreaming
it.
Summits, that's county, that's right.
What kind of plans, future plans, have you made or anticipating with the Australia Falls coming on board and all the commercial properties that we have right under construction at the present time?
Well, Bob, you could probably answer that, but we do have plans for that. Would you like to maybe answer that?
I mean, these plans are going to be, you shouldn't have plans, we have plans for them. You better have plans because they're coming on board on 2009.
Oh, yeah, and we're very well aware that they're coming on board. And we do have plans for that capacity, and you want to address that?
So we're working with the developers. They want to come on, some's come on 2009, someone's come on 2010. We have enough capacity. We're building more capacity coming on 2009, either with the deal with Goodyear or with Cerevel.
Where are you building this capacity?
At Cerevel and McDowell.
Now, is this the new plant that you're talking about?
Yes, that's the Mag 28 approved. Your site for 8.2 million gallons.
Right. My concern, I've watched this plant built from ground up. From the time they took the first shovel of that ground and watched the plant grow, been like Frank's Councilman Cavalier said, we've been through the plant, we've toured the plant, made assurances day after day after day after day, month after month in its construction, that we weren't going to experience the things that we're experiencing today. And frankly, I'm disappointed in this. I can't understand why you people, did not go back to the firm, the European firm, that put this thing in the ground and brought them back and said, look, correct this. This is your problem, not ours. Correct it.
Well, I don't know how to. Is that something you want to answer? I don't. That's a corporate thing, I think. I'll answer
Mayor
that.
and Councilor Souza, that's a very difficult proposition. We've looked at it. Unfortunately, I know it's an excuse, but we inherited this plant. We were given the same assurances, and at the time, the plant probably did meet all of its requirements, but requirements have changed. You got houses now within 150 feet. The community expectation now is higher than it was before. So I can't really blame the plant designer because we're not sure exactly what their parameters were and what they're giving in money. And we've thought about it, but we think we're better off just repairing it and going ahead and just making it perform the way it should perform because of the new requirements.
Then my next question to you is this, how much are these corrections going to cost you?
Right now, the corrections we're doing right now with the odor and is around $6 million.
And of course, you're going to look to the customers to reimburse you for these. I'm almost sure.
That is correct.
You're correct. Yeah.
That will go into
I'm one of
rate
those
base.
people that you're coming to.
I'm fully aware of that.
And there's 6 other people on this council that are going to be affected the same way by their rates.
Yes.
Okay. And I take exception to this.
Well,
I really do, because you had recourse to that. You could have gone back to Suncor and told Suncor, look, you made a deal with these people to put this plant in. We bought this thing. You have a responsibility to back us up.
Well, you could be right. I mean, there's something I'll have to talk to the lawyers about, and we've been thinking about it. We've been looking at it. And to answer your question, we're very aware of the impact of rates. This is why we didn't just go ahead and plunge in and do like the upgrade of the chemical scrubbers. We thought we ought to try alternatives because by doing that we saved over $1 million in capital because we're quite sure this ion exchange system is working. Now we're very conscious of it, and everything I do I'm very conscious of the fact that I've got to get that dollar back, and it's got to either be through the developers or it's going to be through you as customers, and I'm very aware of that.
Well, let me tell you, I'm going to be first in line when you go for rates.
Well,
thank you. Let me see here. I'll leave my notes out here. I guess my questions have been answered. Thank you.
okay, thank you. Councilmember Lord?
Well, Sean, as always, economic development is very important in that area. Is going to have more businesses come in, so I know you're going to be the watchdog on that. And so I think Lipscomb is certainly aware of that. And I have to thank you for the steps you have taken. I think you have found out how the people are when you don't give them good service. You've had enough complaints exalted this year, and deservingly so. You were somewhat slow in correcting the problems. I'm not sure why that was, but I applaud you for taking those steps now. And Sean, we just depend on you being the watchdog of what's going on. I guess I was concerned, and, I am not an expert on this. I wish I could tell you I was. I admire you, Councilman Holland, when you talk about this so easily, but I did get from you, Sean, you were uncomfortable with the ion exchange for the above-ground buildings, the treatment, and so that concerned me a little bit. Because you're one of these people that normally talks really strong and positive about the different effects on water, and I don't get this from you.
It hasn't been, as mentioned by the engineer, it hasn't been used in wastewater treatment plants in the United States. So it's I don't want to say it's an unproven technology, but it's just something that hasn't been applied. We haven't used it in this type of application. So I'm cautious in the event that it does not work. Does that further delay a more permanent, more traditional wet scrubber upgrade to be able to handle the odors, not only at the existing facility, but if they do upgrade it another 1 MGD and now a 5 MGD treatment plant, again, given the close proximity to the homes and the development in the area.
You indicate they're using them in other countries?
Well, the engineer, the gentleman from McBride Engineering did, yes.
Have we seen studies on it? Do we know how effective?
I've asked.
Do we have anything on it?
I've asked our consultants to look into that technology. They're unaware, again, of any application in the United States in a domestic wastewater treatment plant, and they wouldn't necessarily recommend it at this point, given that it is cutting edge. That doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing, but again, it's unproven, and I'm just cautious. I want to make sure that we don't allow a 1-month pilot test to turn into a 3-month pilot test, to a 6-month pilot test, to a 1-year pilot test, and the test never gets completed and it never gets approved, and then we go right back to the issue where we're trying to upgrade chemical scrubbers and we're having problems. So we do have momentum, as the Vice Mayor mentioned, and I just want to make sure that we continue through. Perhaps we did take a little time, LIPSCO, to get up to speed, and they've been slow to respond, but they're doing good things now, and we just want to make sure that they keep doing them.
Well, and I'm happy to see the partnership and the cooperation between the two companies. It's very, very important, because in the end, all the people from Goodyear call us. Whether it's your company or not, we get the calls and the emails, and so that does concern me. And on prices, well, on all utilities, prices are going up, and I think we've seen that with what our residents to the south of I-10 are experiencing. And I think that, yes, this is an additional cost, and I can understand your concern, and I am too. But definitely all of us are going to see increases on water and water systems. It's just a fact of life.
You mentioned the program you're looking at is it's experimental, if you would. It's not on the cutting edge.
It's not a proven.
Well, okay, this is the same way this program was. We were assured that it was on the cutting edge. Okay, it was the future that we could expect in wastewater treatment plants. And look how it turned out. So I appreciate your confidence. Thank you very much for the time.
You're quite welcome. I do that to you all the time, so that's
Thank
fine.
you.
So that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember Osborne?
Well, I'm certainly no expert on this. All I can tell you is my 3 goals strictly are: you can't stink, you need to run efficiently, and you need to be ready for the future capacity. And I'll just leave it at that, because that's where it comes down.
That sums it up.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, it was a nice summation, actually.
Thank you.
I think so, too.
I remember this was not when we approved this LIPSCO wastewater treatment plant, it wasn't unanimous on council. A lot of deliberations. But I'm convinced that council would never have approved this if they knew that in a couple of years there was going to be an interconnect, that there was need to be an interconnect. Because the reason we were doing it was because the capital costs associated with building the plant were less than the transmission lines would have been carrying it down to 157. And now we're building more transmission lines to interconnect. So, this just, we wouldn't even have them had we known this was going to occur. It's really a disappointment. And another thing is, it was 4.2, and then they're going to add 4.2 to that. And then they're going to go to Cerebral and do 4.2 and add 4.2. So it's going to be 16 plus. I'm not sure exactly the timing. But now, there's no way they're going to 16. You know that. So we're going to pick it up. And regardless if they pay for it, and I know they'll pay for that service, but this was not the intention, you know. And this is disappointing, I think. And I really am worried, Sean, that in 2009 or 10, this is going to be an embarrassed city, because we're going to have a shortfall somewhere in this, and we're going to be unable, I feel, to handle wastewater on a day or several days. We're close.
Well, I think the commitment that city management and staff, I know certainly myself, we won't allow that to happen before we come to you with a red flag saying, we need your assistance. We won't let this train run off its tracks. If we see something going south, I know from city management and staff, we won't allow that to happen. I'm hopeful that it doesn't.
But the red flag has to come a couple of years in advance of the problem.
Not the same day that the
Because
rule changes.
You know how long it takes to acquire anything of that substance. But anyway, I agree that Bob and his folks have been working hard on this last year, and I know you have, and I know, what's her name, with the corporate commissions?
Chris Mays.
Chris Mays has been superb in this case, I think. So, you know, we're doing what we can. It just, it's a worrisome situation, I think.
Mr. Dodds can put a price tag on the front of the building.
That's not so funny, really.
No,
that might happen.
That's one option.
Okay.
Could be a friendly price tag out there.
Sean, one of the things that I want to make clear, that when the new city manager comes on board, whoever he or she is, okay, that you sit down with him and explain what this process has been from the year 2000 up to the present time and what we are actually faced with. Because the concerns that the mayor has, I have those same concerns. I don't think we're going to be able to fulfill this. I'm concerned that we're going to not be able to deliver, and it's going to be an embarrassment, a major embarrassment. Not so much for Lipscomb, but for the people that sit on this council.
Err on the side of caution.
Always.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I did want to make a short report. Any other council members wish to report? Councilmember Osborne.
I have to tell you about the Arizona Town Hall. I participated in it along with Mr. Dalkey, and I just want to let you know that it was fabulous. The caliber of people and the networking that took place was outstanding. We had a great deal of discussion about state trust land, so that was a wonderful learning experience for me. We discussed statewide transportation plans and circulation. Many things that were discussed. I am pleased to say that Goodyear already either discusses or addresses or does them. Many things that, because this was statewide, this town hall. And one of the underlying themes that ran throughout all discussions across the board pertained to regionalism and how that we're all supposed to do that. But I was just so happy to be involved in that and thankful and honored, and met a lot of great people. And the discussions, I'm looking forward to the final report to come out, and I know Brian probably has some more things to say about it. But it was really cool. Besides waking up in the morning and seeing the Grand Canyon out there. I just have to go in there.
Make us all jealous.
Did you want to follow on that, Brian, right now?
I can, just real quickly, I'd agree. There were about 120 people throughout Arizona, educators, business, developers, residents, government officials, so it was a really broad cross-section. It was my first Arizona town hall, as it was Councilmember Osborne's, a phenomenal experience. I think what's going to come out of it is some very good public policy recommendations and I believe that report will be coming out the latter part of this year. So typical of all Arizona town halls, this was the 42nd, something like that. So they have 2 a year. And anyway, I look for good things to come out of it. I would agree that there were a lot of things that Goodyear's doing. The only other things I'd add is there are a lot of attention to environmental, green buildings, high densities, how we look at infrastructure corridors too. So it's a pretty good comprehensive look at planning for the state. But thank you.
Oh, one last thing. I went on a tour of the Waste Management Butterfield landfill last week, and lots to be thinking about with that. Ironically, though, the next day, I went to my daughter's state track meet, and it was at the Cave Creek Golf Course. And I'm standing there not realizing that I was standing on a mountain of trash, because that's what it was. That was a previous landfill. That was a golf course. So.
19th Avenue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's,
I'm
okay.
gonna be brief.
Rob, go ahead.
I would say get over to the Boys and Girls Club and meet the new leadership. They've got a new, I don't know if they call it executive director, but a branch manager, I believe. He really wants the opportunity to get connected or reconnected to folks out here in the Southwest Valley. So if you haven't had an opportunity, I know we support them as a city on a regular basis, but get over there and look at what you support. They sure, I mean, they've had some renovations, but they sure have a long way. They provide a fantastic array of programs for our kids after school and during the summertime. So, yeah, use all the influence they can get.
I just wanted to say that for those of you that did not go to casino night on Saturday night, see some familiar faces in here. We had a good time, and it was to support the Victims Advocacy Shelter program that's ongoing now between the Tri-Cities of Avondale, Buckeye, and Goodyear. And I declare it a success. At least there were a lot of us in here that had a good time, right, Mayor?
Yeah, we had Buckeye there with us, too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, by the way. Just a quick one here from me. It's next week, I think, on our agenda, we're going to have two items. And if this were a business, you and I would be discussing these, you know, talking about them. But it isn't. It's a government operation. There's an open meeting law requirement. So I haven't been able to talk to you about these things. And I hate for you to get it from me for the first time in an open meeting, but that's what's going to happen. But just to summarize, without violating any laws, we're concerned about making this duty more desirable to our people in the city. I think 3 people running for council last time was a wake-up call. 3 people, 3 billets. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about that from the standpoint of, do we want a citizen committee to look at that again? And it's time to do that anyway. And then the other thing was, since we brought one young lady on 2.5 years ago, now through Lori Hillebrands and Susan, we've never really agreed to the roles and responsibilities of that position and that office. And we've gone from an assistant to a chief of staff. And if anybody's guilty of failure to do that, it's probably the person speaking right now. But we need to agree on what those roles and responsibilities are and how we interact with the staff through those positions. We owe it to those people to do that. And what I've asked Rourke to do is, let's get it out of the politics. Let's get out of the personal likes and dislikes should be irrelevant. I'd like to hire, I think it's $10,000 or $12,000, something like that. And I can't say any more because I go beyond it. But an organizational expert, someone who can talk to us that says, in view of your expectations of what these people are supposed to do, this is how it should be organized. And that would be after talking with all of us and predecessors. So I can't get into the details of that, but that's what you're going to be seeing. And again, it's too bad you can't talk face-to-face on this stuff because you violate the open meeting law. So anyway, that's coming downstream. Next week, is that correct? Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. Brian, anything?
Just one last comment, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, is next Monday we are closed in observance of Veterans Day. So our meeting will be, we'll have work session 5 o'clock next Tuesday, followed by the council meeting at 6 o'clock. So just wanted to make sure the public was aware.
Thank you.